The employees want to do well, right? We all take our jobs wanting to perform well, so we need to know when there's a problem so that we can fix that. It also should not contain any offensive statements, terms, or sarcasm. We want our performance evaluations to be professional and specific enough so that it helps guide the employee to the upcoming year. So let's talk about the rating criteria. This is also something that is provided on the front of the city manager's evaluation. It has 4 different scores. It has 4 for excellence. It defines that as demonstrating strong expertise within key areas of responsibility. 3 is that it meets expectations, or score of good, and that you perform most difficult parts of the job competently. 2 is a fair, meets most expectations, is adequate but deficient in one or more key areas and will require additional training or assistance to achieve those expectations. I would expect that if an employee is going to be rated on a 2, there's been some conversation with that employee, probably on more than one occasion, about what those deficiencies are and what areas need to be corrected. And 1 is poor, failing to meet those expectations, which is serious performance deficiencies that inhibit adequate performance in the position. Absolutely would expect there's going to be a lot of conversation with the employee if there's a rating of 1 in a category. Once the council has gone through the process of creating their performance evaluations, compiling all of their scores, and submitting everything to the council president and that other city council member to put everything together, it is all going to be brought to an executive session for the review of the performance evaluation and the overall score, and at that time there is also considerations for compensation. So in 2019, council adopted a salary schedule that was a 7-step schedule. That schedule is in place, and that schedule is adjusted by any cost of living increases that are given to non-bargaining employees. So it will adjust with that COLA when one issues, although there hasn't been one issued since, I believe, 2019 was the last one. July 2019 was the last adjustment. So the employee is granted advancement on the schedule and until they're stepped out with meets or higher performance rating. Council is able to evaluate the total compensation from comparably sized cities to determine competitiveness. So that is the information that HR will be compiling and giving to council president. It's usually easier for council president if the president comes in and meets with us and we can kind of go over all the criteria in advance. And that's the opportunity for council to consider the overall compensation and whether or not it should be adjusted. So when you see the comparator data, and if the city manager is under comparator data, you can consider different things like deferred compensation, vehicle allowance, stipends, cell phones. Those are all different forms of compensation that are common to city managers, and all that's broken down on the chart that is provided to council. There's also performance bonuses. If the city manager's done something well or exceptional throughout the year and they want to do a performance bonus, it does not impact the salary schedule, and it's also something that council has considered and may consider, which has to do with lump sum contributions to deferred comp. Sometimes it's vacation increases or other bonuses like that. And that's information that council is free to ask for if they need us to gather that information for them, but we try to provide as much information so that you're able to have those conversations in executive session. Once all of that has been completed, then that final meeting is going to be scheduled for a council meeting where you will then vote on compensation and you will present the performance evaluation at the meeting or accept it at the meeting. And then I will open it up for any questions or clarification that you might have.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? Rick, and then Valerie, then Rob.
Thank you, Diana. I've asked this question before, but I always like to keep at it. When you go to school, you have 5 different steps if you go to the evaluation rating criteria, 1 through 4. When you go to school, you have A, B, C, D, E, and F. So you have 5 levels, but we only have 4 levels. And what is the purpose that we don't have an in-between, the good versus the excellent?
Well, for this specific criteria, this is actually defined between the city manager and council. And so I would have to actually point that back probably to the city manager about why you guys decided to go to the level 4 versus 5.
Yeah, we originally had level 5, but in 2019, it was through the city manager evaluation performance group, which was at the time the council president, President Lovelace, and prior council president, Dennis Roller, and myself went through and reviewed a number of evaluations throughout the state of Oregon and beyond, and tried to take the best of all of those to have what you're working off of right now. And there was a discussion, and Valerie might be able to highlight more than that. I think, if I remember correctly, one of the discussions of going from a 5 to a 4 was that sometimes it's too easy just to pick a 3. I'm not sure if that was one of the, I'm not sure, Valerie might have a memory on that, but at the time, the council, the selection committee that was doing that thought that 4 was a better way to go than 5.
And I will just chime in on that because, yeah, we did go through that discussion. We had several, and it was, I think, basically, it was just a 3 that you really had to think about it. And it's a matter of using the rubric and really looking at each one individually as you go through it. So it was a council decision, and we did have a lot of talk about it at the time. But I think that's where it ended up landing at the time. Do you want me to carry it on? Okay,
Yes.
I was going to carry through. My question was, and I don't remember ever getting prior performance evaluations, the past 2-year evaluations, any time that I mean, maybe it was there and I just didn't see it, but I don't remember ever getting a packet that included the last 2-year evaluations. In terms of, were there comments or was it just the numbers that were given through? Do you know? I don't remember.
During the presentations, the council president has a slide that shows the past 2 or 3 years and how this year compares to the other years. That's how that's been presented in the past.
So it's actually been presented in executive session at
Yeah.
the time? Okay,
Yeah.
I thought we were saying that it happened before that meeting, and I for more time to look at it. Thank you.
Rob?
Yeah, first, I'd just like to comment that this process is so much better than the last time I was on the council, because it was what they were doing back in the early 2000s was just basically winging it and not preparing counselors. And I know that newly elected counselors from at least 2006 on would basically just be blindsided in October and say, oh my gosh, you got an evaluation next month. So this is just way, way, way better than it was. So kudos to anybody and everybody that was involved in creating this. I just also like to comment on the 4-step evaluation criteria list, and I'm just off the top of my head, to me, like number 2, where it says meets most expectations, to me that's, but it says fair. Fair to me is kind of like below average, but meets most expectations is not below average. So I'm going to have a problem where, I may be scoring, I have no idea, as I haven't begun to think about it yet, but I may be scoring some things as meets most expectations, but it's actually going to, on this scale, fall below average. So that to me is a real shortcoming of the 4-step plan. But I'm just telling you up front that just if I say someone meets most expectations, I don't call that below average, but on your scale, it would be below average. So we may end up with that conundrum, at least in my case. Assuming, I haven't even begun to really think about the evaluations specifically. But I'm just wondering, on the 4-step plan, after Ring brings it up, is this the same as all the other employees in the city? Do you have a five possible scores when they get evaluated or when their performance is reviewed?
So the performance evaluation for other employees in the city is based upon the I-value and the core competencies of the job, and it's not a scored process. And so it is evaluating where the employee's performance falls within the core competencies of the position, so how they're performing their job within the manner that is defined by our I-value system. And then they are rated whether or not they are performers or exceed, or the highest level performer. It's about 3 different categories that they're going to fall into typically for the performance evaluation, but there's not a scoring criterion that is used.
Okay. Let's see. So are there for any other employees, all the other employees are on a step plan as far as their raises and all that, is that correct?
So they're on salary schedules, just like the city managers is on a salary schedule, yes.
So it's like a step, okay, salary
Correct,
schedule,
yeah.
thank you. So are any other employees also possibly considered for any bonuses or merit raises or anything like that? Are they eligible for anything like that?
So the salary schedule is what it is, and that is where it stays, but the other employees are not under contract. So
Right.
the city manager's position is different than the other employees because it is a contracted position versus the others. So what the other positions have, or most of them, are defined by a collective bargaining agreement, and we have to follow that CBA.
Okay. Okay. So I'd like to just make a comment. It seems to me that I understand that the need and/or the manager's right to have the evaluation in executive session for all kinds of reasons. But after all the scoring and discussion and all that goes on, and the score is what it is, basically, it's in the books, so to speak. At that point, it seems as though then there's a discussion about possible additional compensation.
Correct.
And that's actually, at that point, separate from the evaluation, because the books are already closed on the evaluation at that point.
That's correct.
So
Although the evaluation still goes to a council meeting.
Right, exactly. Well, to be announced, basically.
Yes.
Yeah, to be ratified or whatever.
Yes.
It seems to me that the second part of that, meaning the discussion about potential for additional compensation, is not really appropriate for executive session. There's no privacy really needed or warranted there. The scores are already in the books. It's not a negotiation, it's not a contract negotiation. It's basically just, do we want to give them a bonus or not? And my way of looking at it would be, the public deserves to hear that. And if a counselor is for a bonus, I think the public should hear why the counselor is for the bonus, or if the counselor is against a bonus. And I guess the fact that we have the STEP program, it's interesting that there's both a STEP, I guess that's kind of almost like a mandatory raise if someone is still employed, I guess, and the bonus as well. I think that the bonus is separate from the evaluation. Matter of fact, I think it even says here, on the last page, compensation considerations, it says, following the performance evaluation, council will consider overall compensation for the employee. So it's clear that it's after the evaluation. I don't feel, other counselors can weigh in or not weigh in, but I don't feel that that should be in executive session. I think that the public really deserves to get to hear what's inside the minds of the counselors if they're going to be giving raises or withholding raises or anything like that. And other counselors can think about it, but I'm going to have a hard time actually participating in the executive session for that part of it.
So regarding executive session, I would probably turn that over to Mark for further discussion if that's something council wanted to discuss. But I believe that that is how it is outlined, and there is an actual vote on that compensation that is had at a council meeting, which of course discussion could be had by councilors during that particular vote when that is had. But regarding the appropriateness of executive session, that would be outside my area. Regarding the STEP schedule, that STEP schedule was actually put into place at the request of council. in order to have a defined schedule, because every year it was a discussion of, okay, what's 2%, 3%, 4%, 5%, where are we at with comparables? And so it was a way to actually define a structure that was in place and then look at that comparability in comparison to that structure and how it all fits together at the end of that evaluation period. So what is in place today was actually at the request of council a couple of years ago, and so that's what we've been functioning under.
So I don't know if Mark is ready to comment any of that today or not, but I would like to hear what you have to say on it, or maybe now or at a future meeting.
So I will probably chime back in a couple minutes. I'm looking at the Attorney General's manual on that topic right now. The ORS is not explicit when it comes to that level of detail as far as compensation considerations. I can tell you that I have come across where the manual says you're not to discuss compensation in the hiring of chief executive in executive session. Not sure if there's a distinction between a currently employed one in compensation in relation to that person versus a potential hire, but I will get back to all of you shortly.
Thank you. Any other questions? Valerie?
Yeah, I have a question on looking at the salary schedule. It says a salary survey shall be performed to gauge market competitiveness every 4th year. So do you go out every 4th year and do that? Or it seems to me that's kind of part of the discussion every year. Or do you actually do the survey once every 4 years?
No, we actually go out for non-bargaining. We're normally going out and looking at all of, because there's so many positions, we're looking at all of those positions about every 4 years. But for the city manager, we go out and we collect that data and provide that to council president each year.
Other questions?
One other thing I just wanted to add is that I did provide you just with a handout on performance management. This handout came from our supervisor's manual, and it just has some good information to kind of help you when you're sitting down and writing that performance management, some things that will help you remember what to avoid and what to look towards when you're writing the actual review. So I hope that you find that helpful when you're working on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Rob has another question.
So when Aaron sent out, I guess, the 7-step pay plan, I'll get the exact wording on that right at some point, but whatever it's called. I guess 163 is the top for manager, I guess, after 7 steps. Is that right?
I
So
believe on
I
the
just
salary
don't-
structure right now, yes.
So I guess it's kind of public knowledge that Aaron makes 173 now, and I'm just wondering what's the explanation there?
I didn't look up anything related to compensation for today, but I believe he's on the salary schedule.
It seems like it's published in public knowledge that it's 173, and I just...
Yeah, I don't know where that number's coming from, Counselor. I'm part of the salary schedule, and I am topped out at step 7, as I've been here for, and have gone through those steps in those years.
One thing I might add too is that sometimes when you see compensation, there's total compensation, meaning that they may be looking at the wage plus 457 contribution or other contributions that might be being made on behalf of the employee. That doesn't mean that that money is being paid as part of a paycheck, but as part of total compensation, and that might be what you're referring to, but the city manager is currently on the step schedule.
Well, I guess total compensation, I don't know that he provided that the last time I asked for the contract information. I think I don't know, it's been reported publicly that it's about $60,000 in benefits above the salary, but I still somehow, maybe Adam or somebody else has, or maybe I'm just incorrect, but it just seems like it's been reported that he's at 173. So I don't know. That may be that the car allowance got changed, and maybe that is considered now pay rather than that would only be $6,000 a year. But maybe that's part of it, I don't know.
Now, what it was, Adam just whispered in my ear what it was last year I cashed out some of my vacation because it was getting too big and I wasn't able to utilize some of it. So that's what that extra was, is a one-time thing.
And when we prepare the comparable data that's provided to the council president, it breaks down for all of the different jurisdictions, all of the compensation, and so all that information is provided to council.
Thank you. All right, council, I think we're ready to move on to the next step. Next up on our agenda today is a little bit different, where instead of having a presentation, we're just going to have a discussion on our own procedures and kind of check in on how things are going and whether there's anything that we'd like to change about the way that we've been taking care of business. So I sent you all on Friday an email with kind of an outline of today's discussion, and then you should have a copy of it on your table. So it looks like an email. It actually says Julie Hall at the top because I forwarded it to her this morning. If you flip over to page 2, it will give you the outline of various topics that we've assembled to talk about today. I tried to put it in kind of an order of grouping some different topics together. And first up is to talk about committees and how we want to incorporate committees better into our process. One thing that's come up is the selection of committee members, and we have in Resolution 206901, which should also be in that same packet, there's a process for this written nomination ballots of the committee members, which we've all gone through a couple of times this year already, but in that it outlines, we have this paper ballots that show the various nominees, and you all are circling or putting a star by your favorite person and then passing it down towards me, and it outlines the process here. Let me turn towards it. The reason why I added this to the agenda today is that people have had me change the process on the fly. And so I want us to all just take a look at it and see whether we agree to it or whether we need to make a change. So what it says is that during the appointments, the mayor and council shall have the opportunity to make comments about any of the applications for the committee position prior to the nomination. The mayor shall distribute a list of applicants, and the council shall indicate their preference and sign the list. The mayor shall read the names of the applicants receiving the most votes and the name of each councilor that has so voted, and then call for nominations. After receiving the motion and a second for appointment, the council shall vote. So the last time this came up, somebody asked me to read the names of all, how everybody had voted, and that's not actually what the procedure calls for. It just calls for me to read out whoever had received the most votes. So is there a preference on how you want to handle that? Brian?
Yeah, in the interest of transparency, I think it would be good to have all of the votes read, not just whoever received the most votes. And even stepping back another step, I don't totally understand why we have a paper ballot, like pre-ballot process, when all of our other votes are just voice votes. So if anyone can speak to that, that would be great too.
Rick?
Brian, the reason we went that way is because it could be, when you have a committee meeting, there used to be the time where people would be nominated for that position, and whoever raised their hand first on the nomination was usually the one that got it. And other people, you can be timid and hold back and say, well, I don't know if I'm going to vote for that person. But when you have the piece of paper in front of you, it's less intimidating, and you can indicate you have a preference for that person, and then you get a consensus of the council without any, I would say, prejudice or indication ahead of time, although you can indicate when you're going to do that, as it says right in here, if you want to be in favor of somebody, to state why you're in favor, so that can come out. And there have been on committees before where you nominate a person and immediately close the nominations and nobody else has the opportunity to get in there. So I have no objection if the council wants to go forward and read the names of everybody that's been circled and by whom. I think that would be a good thing, but I think the process of giving people the opportunity to be nominated has a stronger position with just circling the ballot for the initial round. Thank you.
Thanks, Rick.
Any other thoughts? Vanessa?
I don't have a preference one way or the other if we do a voice vote or if we use the ballots that we currently use. The ballots could possibly streamline the process when we're voting on 4 or 5 different individuals to circle through and vote through each counselor. On that could take a while, but I, along with Councilor DeLagrange, prefer that each vote is read aloud.
All right, so would the council be in support of having all the names read? Rob?
Rick, I really appreciate your explanation there, and I think that it kind of prevents kind of succumbing to peer pressure or a gang mentality or anything like that. And I think Brian's point to having everything read kind of splits the difference. But I really appreciate that explanation. Thanks.
All right, would you all like to have all the names read or just the top nominees? Let's do hands in favor of all the names read. I'm seeing Rick, Joel, Rob, DJ, Vanessa, Kurt, and Brian. Okay, so we will we'll have to work on amending the resolution, but reading all the names. We also have had some discussion about how committees should nominate their recommendation. What would you like to see? What do you want committees to put forward when they make a recommendation for their preference for a committee member? At one point, we had an issue where we received a name, but we didn't have any sort of reason behind it. So do you want the committee chair to submit a written or come and tell us why they chose the way they did? What would you like there? Brian?
I think part of it is, I don't remember the exact details of this one case, but I think part of it might have been that they did it over email. And so I think part of it might be that I would like the nominee to be chosen at a committee meeting. Even if it's just a Zoom meeting, it's still at a meeting as opposed to over email. So that's the one piece of it. And then I forgot what the other piece was.
Other thoughts, Valerie?
Yeah, I would say, because I want them to give thorough thought behind it. I don't want it to be, oh, by the way, we were supposed to do this. Who do you want to pick? I would like to have them have the opportunity because they're going to be working with this person. And I think that was the whole reason, is that we always felt like, well, we're choosing this person, but we don't know who's on there exactly right now and what their strengths or weaknesses are. And so you would like to have them have that conversation and be able to say, we prefer this person because, and just have something there, a reason behind that. So that was just my thought, is just to have a name didn't really tell me much of anything. I could have pulled that out. And so I'm sure they have discussions, and I just would like to have their thoughts as to why they chose that person.
DJ?
So I would suggest having some sort of methodology that we have. You know, they say all the names, they say why they do their ballots. So they do it similar to what we do, which will also encourage that conversation and maybe a better recommendation and consideration of the applicant. So I think however we do the appointment, I think we should have the committee members do the same.
Rick?
One question I have, are we, the council, still preserving the right to still make the final decision even though the recommendation is made by the committee? Okay, thank you.
Yes. Okay, so would council be in favor of having committees follow a similar process to ours and then providing us with a written statement at the end of why they chose the person they chose? I'm seeing hands from Rick and Valerie and Rob and DJ and Valerie and Kurt and Brian. All right. Okay, we've talked about the idea of having committee or commission chairs come to the council once a month at a workshop if they choose. Ideas on how you want to handle that? Do you want it to be an open invitation? Do you want it to coincide with when they have a motion to present to us? Is it something that we're going to invite and encourage them to, or just kind of let them know that the door is open if they want to come? Because theoretically, they can come during public comment, just as any citizen could if we're not making a special place for them. So thoughts on that? Rob, then DJ?
Well, if they come during public comment, they basically probably shouldn't be coming to represent the committee or the commission. They're just a person, any old person. So if they actually are the chairman or someone the chairman designates to come to speak at one of our meetings, or come to basically ask to be invited and then get invited to one of our meetings, they are then speaking for the whole committee or commission. So I think that actually is I think there's a differentiation there. I think that it was originally intended for the rare situation when, which we saw last year with the Parks Committee, having not getting full information from the council liaison and having a major problem with the council liaison. So unlikely that that's going to happen very often, but I feel that should something like that ever occur, the committee or commission chair should know that there's an open door and that they could come and speak to the council. I think that it's going to happen so infrequently. They may come and speak when an issue that regards their committee is in front of us, but I think the other one's going to happen so infrequently, I don't think that it's going to have a time impact on us, but it does provide them with we'll say a fail-safe situation. If there's a problem they really need to discuss with us, and they need to present it as the chair of the committee or commission.
DJ?
Sure, I'm aligned with that as well. I think the really important thing is if they choose to come talk to us, which is a matter of policy that we have now. If they make a motion or they have topics of discussion, they're welcomed to be involved with that conversation. But if they choose to, if there's extraneous circumstances outside of a motion or some sort of issue, they need to understand that they can come here. And I would suggest having it separated as a line item. They have our attention during a timed presentation. It could be open for questions and discussion rather than outside of public comment. I'd like to see that.
Okay, so I had taken the language of a workshop from something, I don't remember where that idea came up, but normally the motions would be presented at a business meeting. So would we like to have them invited at a workshop or at a business meeting during the time when the motion is going to be on the agenda? Preference? Does it matter? Rob?
I'd probably rather see them at a workshop because we have them more frequently, and it's probably easier to squeeze them in. But I'd rather see a workshop just because we have them more frequently.
Brian?
Yeah, I'd agree. That makes more sense, especially since we're hearing the motions at the very end of the business meeting. And also, I don't know if that's the best place for those to be heard. If we're going to be inviting them to the workshop, maybe we should be hearing those motions at the workshop also. I'm not sure.
That is on the further down the list, but we could talk about it now too. Is that, do we want motions during a business meeting or a workshop? Arguments in favor, against? Brian?
It seems to me like they'd be better at the workshop just because that's when we do the agenda setting And so if we hear the motion, then it might be something to where we can just roll it right into the agenda discussion.
Good idea. DJ?
Sure. So I've noticed there's a lag between motions made by committees based on the timing of our Wednesday meetings and when it gets into the packet. And, worst case scenario, there's been 5 weeks before we even have a motion recognized. So I'd like to see that expedited. However, I don't want to shoot from the hip. We need to have a structure of how we do it. And I appreciate the change that you've supported, because I think that'll help expedite the actions of the committee.
So moving it to a workshop might allow us to be a little more frosty on responding to those. I'm seeing some thumbs down in this direction. All right. Did you have a comment, Rob?
Not on that, but in the same, on this. I know that Aaron and I discussed it during the one-on-one, and I'm not sure if it belongs on this resolution or not, but that the staff will email committee members when a topic related to their mission is going to be in front of the council. And I think that may belong on this document as well. Aaron said that he was going to send an email out or send a memo that he embraced that idea. I haven't seen that yet, but I think something like that belongs in this document as well, because I know we've heard in the past, especially with the housing committee, that there were times when the council was discussing things about housing, and that I guess the committee was really never advised that discussion was going to happen, and everyone might have benefited had they been here and been able to answer questions. So I would like to see that the staff will email committee members when a topic related to their mission is going to be in front of the council.
Okay. Yeah, that is the final bullet point here in the committee section. Do you want to respond, Aaron, on how you're handling that?
Yeah, that email and conversation at the X-team level has been discussed, and it's the individual department's responsibility with their staff liaisons to make sure that they're reaching out to the chairs of the committees when we know an agenda item will be coming forward in front of council to invite them to participate.
Okay, and then do we want to just kind of make it that when that happens, that we'll allow them to be part of the presentation? Give them a couple minutes during a workshop to speak on behalf of the committee? All right, I'm seeing nods, thumbs. Okay, next up, agenda setting process. So one thing that has come to mind, we spend a fair amount of time during agenda review at the workshops. So I'm going to put the city manager on the spot here to identify for us different ways that we can get an item on the agenda, because there are several methods.
You are correct. There are several different ways an individual council member can get something on the agenda. The first is during a meeting like this, during a workshop, the mayor will ask if there's, during an agenda review, if you'd like to have anything on the agenda or discuss the agenda in general. This is an opportunity for you as a council member to say, hey, I've talked to 5 constituents and there seems to be a concern here. I'd like to have something on the agenda that discusses this. You see if there's interest and we put it on the agenda. That's one way. Another way is through another meeting, and that's your Wednesday night meetings, where for matters for mayor, council, and staff, you have an opportunity to say the same thing. Hey, as a future agenda item, I think we should have this. And it could pertain to the public comment. It could pertain to a council advisory committee motion. It could pertain to discussions you've had with constituents. So those are 2 of the more formal ways of getting something on the agenda. Now, there's another opportunity for you to get something on the agenda, and that is to contact the mayor, the council president, or myself on an individual basis. And what they do is they bring that to the table during our mayor and council president meetings, which happen every other Wednesday that is not on a business meeting week. And at that point, the council president would say, hey, I've heard from 2 council members on this topic, and I think it's important, so we should take a look at this and put it on the agenda, and it'll be put on the agenda. So those are the primary ways to communicate. And when I say communicate, it doesn't mean you have to call them up. You can also send the council president or the mayor an email or myself or whatever and relay your request for an agenda item that way. So those are the primary ways that we have currently right now, you being able to get something on the agenda.
Thank you. So yeah, just to reiterate, you're welcome to contact me and DJ at any time. The agenda review is one way of getting things on, getting 3 people that agree with you, but it's not the only way. And sometimes that part of our workshops can become a little bit of a time suck. Brian?
So am I hearing that you would maybe recommend that we use one of those methods of direct contact and to try to streamline the meetings?
I think that would be great.
Okay.
Regarding the agenda review portion of our workshops, which can become, kind of a drawn-out section, I think, DJ, you have some thoughts, maybe some advice for the new counselors, especially about what they should be looking for as far as upcoming topics go and questions about consent calendar? Sorry, I'm putting you on the spot. I think particularly if somebody does have a question about consent calendar.
Yeah, so this is also just a statement of efficiency, and it goes into a general whole conversation about topics that we discuss on the dais in formal meetings. There are clarifying questions often asked that could be handled through an email to Sarah or myself or the city manager about information on a particular topic or those kind of different things that could be handled outside of a meeting, rather than saying, hey, I had a question about, item 3 on the April 21st meeting. What is that? Well, that's a question that could have been answered far before that meeting, rather than us all being involved with that question, if that makes sense. Using the consent calendar as just an example, but this kind of goes into general captive audience kind of questions and conversations. So just asking to be mindful of things that can be asked outside of the meeting that's going to benefit you as an individual, but maybe the entire council doesn't need to be sitting and listening to during a meeting, if that makes sense.
Comments? Brian?
So just to clarify that would be separate from a counselor wanting to remove something from the consent calendar in a meeting, right?
Yes, absolutely. Still having that check and balance of wanting to remove an item from a consent calendar, that is certainly deserving of a dais conversation.
Rob?
So I'm not sure if I understand Brian's suggestion earlier of, and the encouragement for his suggestion to expedite getting something on the agenda would be a counselor contacting either DJ or Sarah. Does that essentially mean that one counselor can put something on the agenda? I mean, how is it decided? Like, normally it's 3 that would vote. Now one person gets to put it on? I don't get it.
I think essentially, yes. If DJ and I are meeting with the city manager twice a month, and we can also make adjustments to the agenda as needed at any time. But I think essentially if we agree to put something on the agenda, yes, it could be at the request of one counselor. Really, the opportunity to get 3 counselors is your backup option. If you can't get the mayor and city and council president to put something on an agenda, that allows you a plan B to get several counselors to agree with you. That way, I can't be the Lord ruler here and keep things off the agenda. It gives you an option to do that in another way. DJ.
So that's a great clarification. So I would have a question for Mark about concerns about serial meetings. So if there was just a poll of general interest in about a topic, we're not talking about discussions about the topic, but would that constitute serial meeting if we had multiple counselors just showing a desire to have a topic on the agenda?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I'd rather avoid making value judgments on really the public meetings law applies when you're discussing city business. And so that's the definition in ORS. And what to have on the agenda is still a matter of city business. So if it's, if it's just a one-way blast about wanting to have a particular topic, then that's not really a conversation. But if you're having a polling, then that's discourse at that point, and I recommend you avoid that.
Sure, understood. Thank you.
So long as we're on the topic of serial meetings, which probably should have been something that we had on this list here. In regards to emails, Mark, what's your opinion on the counselor sending an email to everybody?
Well, it's dangerous territory, but we're all human, and sometimes there's something that's a pressing issue, and you really want to get the message out. And so, as I just mentioned to Councilor Fazer, if it's a one-way communication that is not responded to, then it's fine. It's not a conversation. It's just one-way messaging. Where you run afoul is if you start getting back and forth communication, and you're going to have a natural tendency to want to respond to something, especially if you have a visceral response when you read it. It's kind of hard to restrain yourself, and maybe you have something important to say, and you want to put your hand up there and say, "Hey, me, I want to say something about that." So, But on the other hand, you're all responsible adults, and you can use restraint in responding. But it is dangerous because it makes you want to respond. But we have this tool in front of us. We have keyboards in front of us, and it's very easy to send off emails. And sometimes you may feel restrained. Well, one person gets to start an email, and then you start to think, well, I want to respond to that, but the city attorney says I probably shouldn't, and so DJ gets the last word because he's the one who sent out the email to everybody.
I have a question on that. If it's sent to all, and if you want to just respond individually to one or whatever, say somebody sends something out and one person, they can make a new email to just the one person, can they not?
They could, but then you run the risk of that one person getting a bunch of individual responses back. And so that one person knows what everybody thinks. And for one, that creates an imbalance of information among the council, which is maybe not a good practice. And then if that one person who gets all the individual responses back just happens to tell one other person, well, Councilor Pell thinks this, Councilor Lovelace told me this, and then they just say casually to another councilor, then it starts to add up, and you've got the daisy chain effect going. So there's all kinds of situations we could come up with where I could say, well, that's technically probably not a violation, and I don't want to stifle your ability to communicate, but like I said, I think we can come up with lots of situations where it's arguably, most likely, probably not technically a violation, but getting close to it.
And I just want to highlight, I'm glad Mark mentioned that the imbalance of information is such a key. I mean, one of the things we try to do is make sure that council gets all the same information at the same time. And from a team approach, that is something that is something that I think is important to note, is you want to make sure that you as a council, you're all getting the same information at the same time. So you will not knowing or maybe having or put certain council members at a disadvantage because they may not have been a part of that conversation that you were a part of if you were connecting with 2 or 3 or 5 or whatever council members. And so from a standpoint of legislating, having you all have the same information at the same time, I think is very important for that team cohesion.
Rick?
So Mark, if we have an idea, and let's say it's an off-the-wall idea, and we really don't want to carry it anywhere if it has no backing, is the best place to bring that forward, like at the end of a business meeting with council, just comments, put it out there and see what response it brings?
Yeah, that's one time, or agenda setting time, or perhaps passing information along to the mayor or council president, and that could be discussed in an agenda setting meeting.
Thank you.
All right, so on the final two topics here, in agenda setting process, I just wanted to note that DJ and I are meeting with the city manager twice a month on the opposite Wednesdays of the Wednesdays when we have business meetings, and doing some work on establishing the agenda. At that time, we have been allowing one council member on a rotating basis to join us for that meeting. I don't feel the need to put that in any sort of resolution or rule that we have to do that, but it has been thrown out there that we should, so I just wanted to get council's thoughts on that subject. Rob?
Yeah, I think that either it should be codified to say that that's what we, quote unquote, to use your language, have to do, or barring that, any counselor that wants to join that session should be allowed to. But I think one of those two things needs to be in there as well.
Brian?
I'll second what Rob said.
Additional thoughts? We have two counselors who want it in writing that a counselor would be always allowed to be present at that meeting. DJ?
So I think it's been a good recommendation. I think having a counselor present or council present at that meeting has solved a lot of concerns with agenda setting, concerns that I know I have had and others have had. I'm on the fence about codifying it because council can just do what it wishes to do. If we do codify, however, the rotating basis, in all fairness, should be involved, because that allows for the same amount of information and an equal opportunity for all the counselors to go to the meeting, rather than just one counselor going kind of every time. So I would go all or nothing if we did a resolution on this, but it is going well. I think it's a good system.
Vanessa?
I would support codifying that into a resolution as well with the rotating basis, because it protects the council from future personalities, essentially. Although it's working now with the individuals that we have serving, you know, if it's not codified in the future, it may not protect that body at that time.
Rick?
I'd be in favor of that also, and if it was not a resolution, then I do agree it should be in a written form of some sort, so it is a document, even if it hasn't taken on the classification of a resolution.
Okay. Other thoughts on this subject? All right. Next up, public comment. So currently, we're holding public comment on the Wednesday business meetings, kind of in the middle of the meeting. We have a blue card that we ask members who want to speak during public comment to fill out prior to the meeting. We have discussed making some changes to this process, but we haven't really solidified anything yet. So what do we want to do about this? Rob?
So I have an initial very strong thought on it, but first I'd like to hear from someone, what is the explanation for why the card would be needed at all? And if no one has an explanation, then maybe the card is not needed at all. But why do we need to know what someone wants to talk about?
DJ?
Well, one of the reasons that I understand is to make sure that they're talking about city business. You know, for a silly example, having somebody take 3 minutes of, you know, why the county's color should be purple instead of green or something would not be pertinent, right? Another reason that we decided to do that was to help the overwhelming public comment on certain topics. So that allowed us to know how many people are talking, and then it allowed us to actually corral that down to just maybe 1 or 2 people that are talking about the same subject rather than dozens that it could be sometimes. So those are the kind of the two main reasons.
Rob?
Yeah, I understand those. I think that another part of public comment says there'll be a maximum of 30 minutes. So there could be 60 people or 100 people, and they might all get, a third of a minute or something like that. So there's a fail-safe there because and we could cut that time to 15 or 10 or 5 or whatever we wanted to, or expand it. So I think we're in control of it there. But I also think that as anybody who's ever stood at the podium and spoken, and there's a few counselors that have, they know that there could be a dozen other people in the room who have a similar thought, but it isn't exactly the same. And it's going to be expressed differently, and there may be slightly different tangents that each person has. So I don't really see, I would say, censoring some people's comments because others have very similar comments. And who even decides how closely related they are? I mean, we had a situation a few years ago when someone wanted to get up and speak about the county nuisance ordinance, the Cheryl Walker County nuisance ordinance. And the mayor said, "Why are you even here? That's not a city issue." And the person at the podium said, "Actually, everyone in the city is going to vote on that. It is a city issue." So in that particular case, the mayor didn't see any relevance whatsoever. And in fact, legally, the mayor was completely wrong. But I'm just saying, for someone to, so what is the litmus test on what's appropriate? I mean, we could have people that it may not be city business now, but they want it to be city business in the future, So I'm just very much against the card requirement. The main reason is it forces people to be here early. If they're not here at 10 minutes before 6, and maybe the public comment's not going to be until 7 or 8 o'clock, depending on what's on our agenda. Could even be later, could be 9 o'clock. Now they've got to be here for 3 hours or 2 hours. So that's my main objection to it. It forces people to be here early. And I don't really see the upside. If we're getting inundated, we could always reduce the total minutes of public comment to handle that aspect of it.
DJ?
So I'd like to also admit that our current method of public comment is imperfect, but it is far better than 2 years ago what we had experienced. It would go on hours sometimes. So having a time limit on that, I could totally get behind it, but we need to have some sort of method to know how many people are here talking. If there's 30 people here, then do we give them 1 minute apiece? Everybody needs that fair opportunity to talk to us. So some sort of way to know how many people are here talking at the very least would be appropriate if we're intending on adjusting the time that they can talk based on that 30-minute time frame.
I think we could still require the blue card, but not have it be due prior to the meeting. We could just have it due up until the time of public comment. A couple of times I have, opened it up for people who didn't have a blue card to do it, after the people with the blue card had gone. From my perspective, it does allow me to organize them a little bit. If people are here to talk about several subjects, I can kind of bundle them together, and so that you hear, them in little clumps instead of just randomly. But I'm not personally opposed to just letting people, kind of after the blue cards go, line up. I think there's several different discussions, regarding this. I guess, first, do we want to continue to hold public comment in the middle of the meeting? Rob?
Just from my observation, because I was on the council a couple years ago, but from watching meetings, it seems as though having it closer to the middle of the meeting did kind of streamline the process. We'll use that wording. And it made it so that far, far less total time was being used and required for it by having it in the middle of the meeting. As much as I'd like to go back to having it in the beginning of the meeting, I think we might run into more of the really expanded we'd have to, for sure, limit the minutes. But I think where we're having it now, I just haven't seen too much problem with it as soon as it was moved away from the beginning of the meetings. That's where it seemed to me to make the big change.
Did you have something, Aaron?
Historical perspective on why that was changed a few years ago. It looked like Valerie was going to maybe chime in too, but it was, council had a discussion when it was at the beginning, moving it more towards the middle. Actually, what council wanted to do is they wanted to move it to, they wanted to prioritize the business meetings to make sure that those individuals that are scheduled to do business can do business first. Those individuals that have a planning thing in front of you and have a consultant with them or an attorney or something along those lines, that if we schedule business with you, that's your time to do business, is during those business meetings. So that was the idea, along with, I think it had some secondary issues also for moving it from the very beginning, but one of the primaries was to allow for the business at hand to be taken care of first.
Was that your comment, Valerie?
Yeah, it was about people paying consultants and lawyers out there in the audience. So that was one of the main reasons.
Brian?
I think public comment works good in the middle of the meeting. I'm not in love with the blue cards, but I understand they serve a purpose. And I think that if we allow people to turn them in up until the time when public comment happens, that would be good. So there's not a cutoff time, like if someone's coming to the meeting for the first time and they're there at 6, they can't speak. So I think if we allow them up until public comment begins, that would be good. And then the other comment I was going to make is maybe we should consider reviewing and responding to public comment immediately after public comment, because right now those are disjointed, and I don't know if that is fully respectful to the people that came to make public comment.
Okay, we will get back to that idea. Rob?
Yeah, I completely agree with Brian's last point, because I hear that from a lot of constituents, that they're being, whatever they had to say at public comment was ignored. They leave the meeting, maybe they don't go home and turn it on TV, and they have no idea if anyone on the council heard a word that they said. So having those two linked more closely, I think, sends a really good message to the public. Also, on public comment, there's nothing in here now, and we've already seen it work well. It was actually in one of the suggestions that I made earlier in the year that council could potentially ask questions of someone who is commenting at the podium. We saw Rick do that with a guy that talked about the skate park, and that worked really well. So it's not in here that council can ask questions of them. I'd like to see that also incorporated in here.
Valerie?
I can't remember where I saw it. I did see somewhere in something that I read over the weekend that you could ask a clarifying question. It was my understanding that you could ask a clarifying question of a person who is doing public speaking, but in terms of a conversation, no. But clarifying is actually in here somewhere.
I don't think it's under.
Well, I have it on the list of items to discuss. It's the third thing down in the public comment section. But let's just backtrack a second. Is everybody okay with allowing public comment or allowing blue cards up until the time that public comment begins? Do you have a comment, or are you just agreeing, Vanessa? She's agreeing. Who's agreeing? I'm seeing Rick and Valerie and Joel and Rob. I'm seeing everybody agree. Oh,
Mayor,
Joel
I
has
just had a
comment?
comment on that. One of the things that it allows is for the city to manage public input so that it's meaningful. And it takes time to do that, either on the part of staff or the part of you to read it and you know, either order it or whatever so that people get heard in an effective manner. And so the blue card is really just a management tool. It's not about censoring anybody or anything like that. But to make it effective for a management tool, it needs some time for people to look at it. And so to expect an administrative person to have public comment in 1 minute and receive all the things in 30 seconds before is unrealistic. So I just want to make sure it's realistic. It can work any way we want it to. There's not one perfect solution. I just want to make sure there's adequate time there so that it can be an effective management tool for the citizens as well as the council.
I think they just have to hand me the pile and I'll be okay with it. I can sort them out pretty quick. It's kind of nice. One nice thing about the blue cards is it does have the rules and tells people about the 3 minutes. So that's kind of, the side benefit in addition to the, us getting the information, they're also getting information off the blue card. Other comments, Rob, DJ?
Yeah, I think that while it may not be intended to be a censorship tool, it becomes a censorship tool if we have to have them in early because there are people who may work until 6 or 6:30 that might want to comment, and they're precluded from doing so unless they actually take time off of work to do it. So I don't want to see it used as a censorship tool. I'm hoping that Sarah or Karen or whoever is manning the desk in the back can sort through them on a fairly quick, efficient way.
I think, didn't we all just raise hands in favor of having people turn
Yes.
them in up until the time that public
Yes.
comment begins?
Yeah.
Did I misread that? Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
And yeah, I mean, I guess I just expect somebody to hand me the pile. They can hand me the pile before the meeting as well as right before public comment. I'll kind of sort them out quickly. DJ?
So something else I think is deserving in this conversation is that timeline, that it's 30 minutes. This is how we compose business. Having it on the blue card, I'm not sure, but the people need to know that 30 minutes is 30 minutes. If we have 10 people, theoretically, we could have 10 people talk, but it's going to go past 30 minutes with one question or a slight delay at the podium or something like that. So we need to have an understanding or a discussion about, is 30 minutes it? I mean, that strokes 6 o'clock and we are done with public comment. We need to have a structure in how we compose business on the dais.
I agree, and I was going to say that one thing that we do have on the blue comment right now is that if 2 or more people are speaking on one topic, those individuals will be asked to select a spokesperson, and one individual will be provided 5 minutes to speak. And I think along the lines of what Councilor Pell said a few minutes ago, as a member of the public, if I came and I was not part of an organized group, I would be rather outraged to have to hand my 3 minutes over to somebody who I'd never met before and really had no idea what they were going to say. So, thoughts on that? Is there any way to even effectively manage that? Vanessa?
I would just like to see that bullet removed, just that rule removed altogether, because each different person brings a different perspective that I think is really valuable. So I don't believe that selecting a spokesperson for a group of people does their perspectives any justice.
Rick and then Joel?
I'm also in favor of the 30 minutes, but also if it's determined there's 10 people in the room that want to speak, that each of them have 3 minutes. And if it takes one person because, let's say, they're older and it takes them a while to get up to the podium, I don't want that to be part of the 30 minutes. They still should be eligible for their 3-minute speaking. Is that understood what I'm trying to get across? Is that when you do the division, each person still, whether it's 1 minute or 2 minutes, they still have that time. It's
Right.
not, even if it takes
That
longer.
the transfer of time at the
Yes.
mic isn't held against anybody. Yes, although I have a question for you all in a moment about how to manage 30 minutes. But Joel had a comment?
Well, I was just going to say that was a specific thing brought into effect where there was very political statements being made by an organized movement that were saying the same thing over and over again at every meeting on a topic that may not even be under the jurisdiction of the council, and it was kind of disrespectful of the public's time and the council's time. And I can certainly appreciate not censoring people, and it can work either way. But the other thing I would caution all of us is if we abuse each other, whether it's during a public comment period by a citizen or whether it's by the council, that will be changed. It won't be tolerated, and the procedures will be changed to have it be more respectful. And so it can work either way again. I don't care which way we do it, and as long as I respect you, it'll work fine. and listen to you.
So it sounds like we are not in favor of having people designate a spokesperson when they're here to speak on a similar topic, but how do we navigate restricting the time to 30 minutes if a large group of people show up to talk about a particular subject? Rick?
Sarah, I think you handled that well the other day when we had quite a few people. You just had them starting to line up. So as soon as one person finished speaking, the other person was already 6 feet behind them, able to step up to the microphone, and I think that saves time.
DJ?
I just can suppose that we are going to get into a circumstance where we have many people here and we give them all 3 minutes and 30 minutes is up, and there's going to be a circumstance where that's going to be uncomfortable to shut down public comment for that evening. And so I'm not saying do we do 30 minutes and, you know, that's it. What I'm saying is we need to establish what the rules are and that we follow them. Because like I said, there's a potential for some uncomfortable circumstances where people showed up for public comment and they couldn't talk because of a rule, but we need that rule.
Aaron, then Brian?
Way to potentially address that, Counselor, is to, with the rules that you're working out right now, they have to have a blue card filled out up, and they have the ability to up to the time of public comment. Once you have those, say you have 30 public comment cards, or 35, we'll just say 30 public comment cards, you got 30 minutes, that's 3 minutes each. So you designate right there, these 30 people, everyone that comes to public comment can speak, and you won't have to turn anybody away based on 30 minutes. Just divide it by how much time, and they're guaranteed. Now, our administration of that may take a few minutes because someone might need to walk up, or we might have a technical difficulty or something along those lines. Should they be penalized for that, that'd be up to you to determine on what you want for your 30 minutes. But if you want 30 minutes of public comment, then that could be the way you alleviate that. At that time, when you're opening up public comment, you've got however many cards, you divide it by no more than 3 minutes each, and that's how you accommodate everyone who showed up.
Brian?
I basically was going to say the same thing that Aaron said. I don't want to have a situation where we're allowing 3 minutes for some people and then 0 for others that don't get in the queue. I would rather that time be split equally between however many number of people want to make public comment. And in the very unlikely situation that we have 50 people or 100 people or some crazy number here, it might be worth considering having a minimum, like, because we don't want to give everyone 30 seconds, that would be ridiculous, but maybe like a minimum, like they get at least a minute or something if there's like a lot of people. But I think dividing it amongst, if there's more than say 10, would be good.
I think, Karen, can we only do increments of 1 minute? Okay, so we have to do 1 minute or 2 minutes, but we can't do like 90 seconds. But maybe just as a rule of thumb, trimming people down to 2 minutes if we have a big crowd on the same topic. I mean, I know the other night 3 minutes felt awfully long when people are, you know, repeating the same themes over and over. Joel?
Well, the other thing I think that, and it has to be judgment at the time of the situation is, and we need to trust our judgment and follow that, is if there's a lot of people here to discuss a topic, it's obviously important to them. To do that at that point in time, unscheduled to the rest of the citizens and to the council with the business that was organized may not be the most fair thing and would not, and would limit their input. And so if we got a bunch of people here on a water treatment plant or abortion or whatever, and there's 500 of them, then maybe that's deserving of a not to be handled at this meeting, but a subsequent meeting if there was some substance and city business to be done. Just a thought.
Okay. Other comments, Valerie?
Well, I can't remember specific, but early in my years, one time I went to Austin. I have a daughter who lives there, and I went to their city hall, and they actually had a blue card similar, signing up where you could designate somebody as a speaker for 5 minutes, and you as a citizen could say you were giving up your time to that person. And I don't know exactly how it was worded, but I do know that there are cities that have something to that effect, where if you know that you're there with a bunch of people, you can actually give up your time up to a certain amount of time for them to speak. So I don't have it offhand, but I do know that is how some other cities handle it.
Okay, so maybe we could offer that as an option. Aaron?
So in response to that, I'm familiar with cities that have that established, and they have that established. You must register well in advance, so that can all be scheduled out. They usually don't have that to where you can have the blue cards up to the beginning of public comment and then try to schedule and coordinate all of that. So it's something that's usually pre-worked out before the meeting begins.
Rob?
So I like Brian's idea of having some lower than 3-minute minimum, but not super low, because that's kind of disrespectful to the people that are speaking. Whether it's 2 minutes or 1 minute, if it was 1 minute, what does that handle, 30 people? The other option too is that in the same way that we take a vote if we want to go past 9 o'clock, I mean, at 30 minutes, we could also take a vote to see if we want to extend this for, X number of more minutes or whatever. That's another option for us. I don't know that I necessarily like that option, but in extenuating circumstance, that could work.
Brian?
I want to try to make it so it's not too complicated. So one idea might be, if we have 30 minutes, that would accommodate up to 10 people to speak for the full 30. If we have more than that, if we have more than 10 people that want to comment, maybe we just make a blanket statement that everyone gets 2 minutes. So it's still streamlining it, maybe not as much as we would totally like, but more than nothing.
Thank you. I had a similar thought. How do folks feel about that? Just if we have, more than 10 people on a blue card to speak on a particular topic, just announcing in advance that they'll get 2 minutes rather than 1 is awfully fast. Obviously, if we had a situation, for one thing, hopefully most people would be here for an item on the agenda. So this is, of course, we're just talking about items that are not even on the agenda. But if we did have 200 people here, another thing, if we really had that many people, which one time I'll say on the council in Yakima, I don't remember what the topic was, but we did have a large crowd of people, and we just had them come through and say their names. It was like 100 people, and they just came through and said, Sarah Bristol, yes, just to show the council, the enormity of the support or discontent, I guess, with any particular topic. Okay, well, food for thought. We will, I think I have enough to kind of go forward anyway with this topic, and we'll see if we'll see what we have to deal with. On the question of questions to citizens, which was something Councilor Pell had brought up, occasionally asking a follow-up question, and we've done that a couple of different times. I personally feel there's been some mixed results with that, but is that something that you all would like to continue to have the opportunity to ask a follow-up question when somebody is addressing you? Yes, I'm seeing heads nod. Okay, we will continue to do that. And then on the topic of
Mayor, can I get I just anticipate it going a little further. So is that one question by one council member, it's done? Or with that one question, does that bring up another question for another council member? And then that brings up another question for another council member. So what is that opportunity for that? And then also from a response perspective, would the respondent have a time frame to respond, like 1 minute or 2 minutes or 3 minutes?
Rob?
I think if the person who's at the podium is such a wealth of information that they started generating multiple questions from multiple counselors, we would be really deficient in not asking those questions or not wanting that input. I don't see that happening, But if that person, like I say, is just so full of information that the council needs, I want to hear them. So, you know, to have a maximum response time, I guess, makes sense from them, but I wouldn't want to cut off another counselor's questions if they felt that they were necessary. And we've already seen in the last 4 months that this process has never gotten out of hand. It's only been used a couple of times. I thought one time to really good use with the skateboard question that Rick had. But if that person is that informed, I want to hear from them, even if it's on a second or third question basis.
I would say there was an instance regarding a particular staff member when I felt like it did get out of hand. And I felt pretty uncomfortable with a city employee being grilled by the council just because they had decided to come and make public comment. And it makes it difficult for me to manage, you know, if one of you gets to ask a question, then, you know, I have to cut off the next. It's uncomfortable. But I think, you know, if you can do your best to keep your questions focused and minimal and important, you know, we can continue to go forward and see how it works. But there have been a couple times, there was also one I can think of during a presentation where we were off topic regarding a parking task force issue. Aaron?
Just another follow-up question then, because Councilor Pell brought up a good point. You might have someone that's got a lot of wealth of information and knowledge. And that could be subjective to some degree. And so it could be that one or two council members think that this is the expert and no one else on council does. So does that one, or do the council members get asked repeating questions, or does the council member get to ask just one question and then it's done? And if no other council member has a question, then it just...
DJ?
So this does somewhat bridge that territory of the captive audience conversation that was brought up earlier, and we'll continue to have them. I have many and often conversations with experts and leaders in this community about topics of city business, and that's just an ongoing experience of a counselor. To prohibit that question, you know, I wouldn't want to prohibit that, but I'm thankful that we're being cautious about the potential time sink and captive audience that could manifest from being able to have an open-ended conversation during public comment.
Rick and then Valerie?
That other time I did appreciate the opportunity to ask a question, but again, I felt a little sensitive that the information being provided went maybe on a little bit too long. So I don't know how to, if we could set up a framework, maybe for that one question, but also for the understanding that the person responding, that they have to be very concise, I think would be helpful. Thank you.
Valerie?
I'm just going to read what it says in here because I did find it. It's under public testimony. It says, okay, each presenter shall be given an opportunity to speak free of any attempt by councilors, mayor, or staff to lead the testimony, embarrass the individual, or comment on the person's testimony either in favor or against. Although councilors, the mayor, and staff may inquire of the presenter for clarification of questions germane to the criteria or issues. I think that kind of says it. You're clarifying, but staying on task. And then it just goes on to say, councilors, the mayor, and staff shall refrain from interjecting their own testimony or opinions for or against an issue. And that's what we're trying to avoid, is getting into a conversation or a discussion. You just, if you want to ask a clarifying question that is germane to the criteria or issue, you can do that as it's stated right now under Section 19.
Okay, thank you. So we've also discussed the idea of responding to public comment immediately after public comment. Whereas right now we have a spot for that late in the agenda. However, another idea is to totally eliminate the review of public comment from the agenda, and that councilors can respond under the mayor and council comments if there was anything that you wanted to respond to. But there's kind of having it as a line item on the agenda maybe makes you feel somewhat obligated to respond in a way that you might not if it wasn't listed on the agenda. So Thoughts on that? Valerie, then DJ?
Yeah, I feel that it should be directly, there's a section here, public comment, and then there's also the review of emails. And emails are just like a written comment, they're just written instead of spoken. I would prefer to respond directly afterwards, because sometimes there's an email or something, but you don't have to. I mean, because it always seems really weird to me, because then I don't really know where to put it. So I would rather respond right after the review of emails, personally.
Okay, DJ, then Vanessa?
So this also boils just right into the next major topic, just trying to be aware of that. Sarah and I had a conversation during that Wednesday meeting about how can we tighten up the end of the meeting, mayor and council comments. A good example would be liaison reports, for example, putting that just into a general category so that councilors don't have this large expectations of giving summary reports of the committee's meetings, but rather, hey, if there's some really important bullet points, feel free to do so. That's one example. And then it was also discussed that perhaps public comment would be a good thing to be put into that if council would wish to do so, because the similar thing happens if we have a bullet point that is response to public comment. There's a potential to have that expectation of that now we must respond to public comment, rather than if we desire to respond to a certain public comment, we could, if that makes sense. So the goal of that is to just reduce, as Sarah said, to reduce the expectations of having to talk about liaison reports or public comments or otherwise. So I just wanted to bring that to everybody's attention, that next subject is about this as well.
Vanessa?
I'd like to see the review public comment be moved directly after public comment. I've witnessed several times during our meetings where folks have made comments and then they stand in the back of the room anticipating a response or anticipating an address to what they came down to say. And, we're moved on to the next agenda item. And I think that's pretty surprising for people. The public comments are fresh on our mind. It gives us the opportunity to address them right away. People can hear what we have to say and then we can move on.
Brian?
I agree with what Vanessa said, and also I don't think that it's really a concern that counselors ever feel obligated to respond to public comment. I've made plenty of public comment, and there's been plenty of times where nobody's responded, so I don't think that that is a real thing.
Joel?
So when I look at response to public comment, there's about 5 different categories. One is it's outside the scope of the issue being considered. 2, it's a substantive comment that can make a difference in what we do and then should be considered during the deliberations, but not at the point in time of the public comment, but it should be carried forth. 3, it may result in another option being pursued because it is substantive, but that would not be done at that time. It would just be done at another time. So there's and it needs to be thought about. It needs to be addressed in an honest manner, and not as from my standpoint, a political manner that would favor my viewpoint or not favor your viewpoint. And it needs to be pretty generic at that point in time. That you have a good point here. We need to consider that when we're looking at the bicycle park or the water treatment plant, and that's scheduled for here, or we haven't thought about that. It's a substantial comment. We need to put it on the agenda and discuss it. Or, the federal government handles that and we don't, and it's a BLM clear cut, and you need to give input back into them and it's outside our scope. So I just think we need to be cognizant of that as we respond and not immediately solve the substantive comment, because we can't.
So am I understanding that you would be okay with that just kind of falling under the mayor and council comments at the end of the meeting, that if there was...
Again, it can work any way you want it to. It can work either way. I just think we need to be aware of what we're doing and do it in a timely manner.
Okay. Rob?
Yeah, I understand DJ's point about people potentially expecting response. I think that possibly we could relabel that part of the agenda to saying opportunity for response to public comment or potential response to public comment. But I think over the years, I've heard so many times from the public that the council never comments on my whatever. And the thing is, even on those times when the council has commented, it may have happened hours later that they don't even know about. This at least gives us a chance to comment when we feel so moved to do so, and the public gets a sense of satisfaction that we heard them. For those people that are disappointed that we didn't comment, it would have been the same had that section been at the end of the meeting anyway. They still would have thought that we didn't comment. But at least on those occasions when we want to comment, the people will feel satisfied that we actually heard them. But I would probably call it potential response to public comment or opportunity for council to respond. I'd probably call it that.
All right, so it sounds like you're interested in doing it directly following the comment. Other ideas? All right, well, it looks like we're in favor of moving it to follow public comment directly. So I guess on to the next issue of matters from mayor, council, and staff. This whole, oh, okay, I'm sorry, did I skip something? What was it, Rob? Oh, turn your mic on, please.
I don't know if it was on your radar, but Section 8, it's a minor point, but I think it could be made better. In the second paragraph,
What are you looking at that has a Section 8?
the same resolution,
Oh,
Section 8, second paragraph. I'm sorry, do you have the whole resolution there, or no?
meeting dates
Yeah, meeting
in
dates.
Resolution
Second pa-
2068-94.
Right. I mean, I can read it, it's just one small part. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. It's about the eighth line down or something. It just says if there's not enough work to do, the city manager may cancel a meeting if there's insufficient business pending before the council to warrant a meeting. I would like to, see that say the city manager conferring with the mayor and the council president can cancel a meeting if there's not enough work. It just seems a little strange to me that the not-elected person would be telling the elected body that he's not going to have a meeting, or we're not going to have a meeting. So I would like to see that the city manager, in conjunction with the mayor, or in conjunction with the council president, or both, or in conjunction with the mayor, something like that. But somebody who's elected, I think, needs to be part of that statement or decision.
I agree. I think it should actually be part of the mayor's job to cancel a meeting. What do y'all say? I'm seeing nods. Okay. That was something I'd flagged at home, but wasn't something on the table for discussion today, but thanks for pointing that out. Okay, back to my list on page 2. So matters from mayor, council, and staff. This section of our Wednesday business meetings has multiple, sections to it, and it kind of seems to drag on. So one of the items that had been included in that was the response to public comment, which we've just moved to a different section of the meeting. But we also have the liaison reports, and we also have the motions from committees. Actually, motions from committees usually falls, it is within that section, which we have just discussed maybe moving to workshops. So that might help. In regards, I guess, to the liaison reports, sometimes we feel like maybe council are, feel like you need to report on every meeting that you went to instead of just hitting the highlights. And so I guess if there's a way that we can just touch on the most important things that council needs to be aware of and not, do a whole book report on the meeting, that would be fantastic. But ideas on that? Something else, Brian?
No new ideas. I just agree with you and DJ that the liaison reports should essentially be optional and people should only be touching on items that are of importance.
Okay. So, yeah, the section here, so we're moving, I guess, if we're moving public comment to a different spot on the meeting, we're going to move committee motions to workshops. Then we have mayor and council comments. I don't know, we're kind of splitting this up. I guess I was hoping to kind of clump these things together under, mayor and council comments. If you felt the need to respond to public comment, you could do it under mayor and council comments instead of having it drawn out as a separate item. But you guys have already discussed doing it different, so I'm not really sure what to do with this. DJ?
So I'd basically just have mayor and council comments, staff comments as just 2 items under that section 8 of the meeting, or on this meeting anyway. And I'm victim of this and experienced in it. When I saw that council liaison report, when I first became a counselor, I wrote it down and studied them, and I gave full-fledged reports, and it just became this big thing over the next couple of years. That this is the expectation, and we're basically gonna summarize the entire meeting, and and then it just cascaded into sometimes an hour-long event. And reducing that expectation to just comments, I think, is kind of a statement of this is no longer summary, but just really important bullet points. So I'd be in favor of just putting that to mayor council comments with the understanding that you can slough in some important stuff from your liaison meetings.
I'm seeing a thumb from Brian on that one, a nod from Valerie and Rick and Joel. Okay, any other discussion on this point? Joel?
Well, again, just like public comment too, it's important for the citizens in our community to know that they've been heard and that the council understands what's going on and that you don't get blindsided. So we got to have those 2 things against each other. One of the things that I like to do is repeat some things that are important to the committee at that point in time because they know they've been heard, just like the public comment that they've been heard. And I think that's the function of a liaison, is to communicate that to the council.
Thank you. And I think we're also trying to communicate with the committees that their official path for getting something in front of this body is to make a motion, and that will put it in front of you, an official recommendation. So if we can focus on those things that they are making motions about, and or bigger topics, of course, the purpose of this here at the end of the meeting is a little bit of a catch-all, that if you feel there's something that the council really needs to know, that's your opportunity to speak up no matter what it is. But we don't want you to feel obligated to, let us know what every committee is doing every step of the way. Alrighty, next up, consent agenda. So, a couple of things regarding consent agenda or consent calendar. What do you do if you have questions about it? And I think one of these we briefly discussed earlier, that is part of the role of the agenda review on Mondays, is to look at what's on the consent calendar for Wednesday and ask any questions, or let us know if there's something on there that you're uncomfortable with having under the consent calendar. We can move it off and have it be a regular agenda item on Wednesday. But you also, and I need to do a better job about this at the beginning of the consent calendar, giving you that opportunity. If you have any questions or want something moved off of consent calendar, that you do have that opportunity to do it. It doesn't take 3 counselors. Any one counselor who has a question or wants something off of the consent calendar can do that. But I have a question about starred items, because this is something that the council, that's a little bit unique to the Grants Pass City Council, and was started a year or two ago as kind of a workaround, but basically we have this thing going on right now where we star an item if it's going to have a small presentation. And I feel that rather than having a star, we just should have it be a council action item that gets a separate presentation and a separate vote. But I know that some of you have been here longer than I do, and you have reasons for having created this system. So if anybody has comments they'd like to share on why we should keep starred items, I'd love to hear it. DJ.
So, yeah, as you said it, the spirit of having that starred consent calendar is historically the council had noticed some abuse of the consent calendar. Items that would arguably need an individual vote that weren't of menial nature, you know, like minutes should be, or a perfect example of what needs to be on the consent calendar. So we had to create a check system that any counselor could basically say, it's obvious that the vote wouldn't be unanimous because I would vote no for it, therefore it is not menial. But I don't recall an item that has ever been pulled from the consent calendar that really deserved a full-blown council action with the staff presentation and public comment. But they were approaching that, almost needing that council action, and that's why we decided to just do starred individual presentations with a separate vote, because it provided the check and balance without spending staff resources and council time on making a full-blown council action presentation when it didn't necessarily need to be. So the spirit of the system, if it's preserved, I'm going to be happy with it, but whatever change that council would like to see to either streamline or otherwise make it more attuned to how governments do business, I'm open to hearing it.
Brian.
I'm just wondering if start items should just be, action items. I'm not totally clear on the benefit of having it be a start item within the consent agenda.
So action items are something that is presumed to have an action on with a full-blown staff presentation, including public comment. So that's the difference between a start item. So a start item is basically it is kind of a council action item, but we deliberated this when we first invented the start item because it's almost like a bridged category, if you will, between just sweeping things down the road consent calendar or full-blown consent. And the council at the time had determined that the middle ground, that bridged ground, was the most appropriate.
Valerie, then Rob, then Rick.
Yeah, I would agree with DJ. There was a point where it was starting to get abused, and there was a couple things that should never have been on the consent that got swept, and so that's where this came from. But one other example of something that I actually like to see a short presentation on is when we do like our quarter financial reports. I just kind of think it's kind of one of those things that we owe to our constituents to just say, okay, because there's always something in our presentation that kind of just talks about why there might be some little adjustments here or there, or some things that are going on. That's something that I felt was it's just public information that's good for the people to hear. They want to know those little things as well. So that was an example of what I thought should be a start, when there was a short little presentation on something that, it's done business, but it's informative to the public and might be worth listening to. So that would be an example of, to me, a start item, because we didn't need to act on it, but it was informing the public.
I have a question about that because you are acting on it by voting to approve it, whether it's under consent or a council action. What is the advantage of having it as a star instead of an action item?
Just because it's informative to the public, and I just think that they deserve to have some financial things just given on a regular
But it
basis.
would be equally informative under council action. I guess I'm wondering what the value of having it under consent rather than moving it to action is.
Well, because what kind of action are you going to make on a report on how the budget happened at the end of a quarter? Because you can't act on it.
Approving it the same as you are.
Yeah. But,
Okay.
but do you deny it? I mean, I'm just saying, that's my question to you. Can you deny something that happened? That's my question. So that was my reasoning behind it.
Okay, Rob.
Yeah, I agree with DJ, and I think that Valerie's point is also really appropriate too. I think that, I mean, we could make it action item, it's just going to start to make our meetings longer, and I don't necessarily see the advantage. I mean, we can, if anyone felt strongly about it, I would imagine that we could turn something into an action item, but I just feel that the consent agenda there at all, the only reason it's there at all is to make things go faster. I mean, every one of those things could be an action item, but it's designed to make our meetings more efficient, more expedient. So that's the advantage of having a start item. If somebody, we might only need 15 seconds worth of clarification from Aaron on something that's got a star on it. I don't think that rises to the occasion of having a separate action item.
Rick?
I like what Rob is saying, and on the start items is I feel the presentation by staff is shorter than normal. It's very concise, where if it's on the original agenda, it can get really bogged down in the presentation. And so it's just like a refresher, but just brings it to attention, but doesn't go into the same amount of detail. So I think it helps expedite things. Thank you.
Other comments, DJ?
And just very briefly, when we made this, just having this structured in this way, that a counselor can star it, almost entirely prevented the problems that we were seeing. Just having this as a way of doing things. So just keeping that in mind. And then also I would presume, if something made it on the consent calendar and enough counselors thought that, hey, this should be an action item, I think we've made a mistake here, that we could easily bump it up to a full-blown council action item if we wanted to.
Brian?
I'm fine with leaving the start items as currently structured.
Okay, sounds like everybody is, so we'll move on. Okay, during our meetings, if the next topic is to get to the meetings, I guess the first bullet point I had here, I just wanted to clarify, sometimes we start getting into deliberations, discussion too soon, and really the first step, you know, we have our presentation, and then we have an opportunity for questions for staff, and sometimes when we're in the middle of that question period, we start getting into comments, and it can be uncomfortable for staff who aren't part of that deliberation process. So we just need to stick to asking them our questions, then allowing public comment, and then we'll come back to council deliberation discussion. So that's just a quick reminder to hold your comments for a few minutes until the right point. As a matter of streamlining our discussions, sometimes there are topics that some of us are particularly interested in. We ask a whole bunch of questions, but if we could just try to keep our comments and questions to the information that we need in order to make a decision on the topic at hand, and not just start roaming around on different interesting points, that would be helpful. I guess an idea about how to handle comments and questions when you all start raising your hand. I've just been kind of going with the first hands that I see, and sometimes I see the same person, you know, repeatedly, or the same person will keep having more than one question or comment, and we keep going back and forth. So would you like me to try to focus on giving everybody the opportunity for a first question or comment before going back to people for a second round, or are you okay with the way things have been going? DJ?
I would like to see that slight change, and that every counselor would have an opportunity before that second round. I think that's only fair. But also, I think it's really going to insist that critical thinking about that first question that you have, and I think that might be a tool for efficiency.
Vanessa?
I just wanted to say, I think that's already established under Robert's Rule of Order, that one counselor asks a question and then provides an opportunity, or a voting member asks a question and then awards that opportunity to their colleagues. So I would support that.
Rob?
I think I understand, Vanessa, to say that it's already covered, right? Yeah, I mean, that's already our rule, that everyone's supposed to have an opportunity, not that they have to, everyone's supposed to have an opportunity before the second round. And I don't know, I could be wrong, but if anyone feels that they're not heard, raise your hand. I've never felt that way. I don't know if other people have felt that way, but it seems to be working fine, even though it is specifically codified that we're supposed to do that. It doesn't seem to be broken, if you know what I'm saying.
I guess just as a matter of practice for me, if I saw the same person, raise their hand, I've kind of been trying to go in the order that I see their hands rather than whether or not they've had an opportunity to ask a question. So this would reverse things for me, and that maybe if you had already asked a question or made a comment, I would, skip over you and come back to you after letting other people have their first comment. So I guess just as long as you all understand that that's what I'm doing, then we're probably good. Vanessa?
Yeah, I understand where you're coming from. And to clarify, I don't think it's necessarily directed at you, Mayor Bristol. I think that there's some counselors that rapid fire questions. So I think that would be up to individual counselors to recognize that rule and observe it.
Right. I'm actually the person who put this on the list, but thank you for noting. All right. Next thing on the list, sometimes we have counselors who don't speak up about their position or their readiness to make a decision, and it makes it hard to know where to go forward. So I think especially maybe in those cases where you're not ready and you're sitting there quietly because you're still thinking about it, it might be helpful to the rest of us to speak up and say, hey, I'm not ready to make a decision on this tonight. And then there may be times when everybody else is, and you've either got to make a decision or do what you need to do on the spot, or maybe you can talk your colleagues into putting it off for another day. But the silence, sometimes people don't know, what to do with that. So I guess it's just kind of a reminder that whenever possible, if you can speak up and let us know what your thought process is, that's helpful. Joel?
Well, the first thing, Mayor, we need to recognize that I don't think that you've tried to not listen to any of us. I think you've tried to be fair and open and honest, and I think we all recognize that. The other thing that can happen in a meeting is we all have different personalities and different ways of communicating. And before we move on, if we haven't heard, like I remember before, Honorable Barry, for better or worse, he wouldn't say anything, and I know he was thinking. And so what I did a lot of times on my management team would I would poll everybody before we made a decision. And Barry, this is your time. What are you thinking? And then that person would give me some valuable information. And so that's just a tool that we can use. So if Brian's not saying anything, or if Valerie's not saying anything, and we're ready to make a decision, I haven't heard from you, Brian. Do you have anything more to add? Not to put them on the spot, because they may be fine with where it's at. And but that's a good tool, management tool to use.
Okay, thank you. Other comments? All righty. Next up, that 9 p.m. continuation vote. Do we need that? Is it helpful? Well, at 9 p.m., so it says in our council rules that the meeting will end at 9 p.m. unless we have a vote to continue the meeting past 9 p.m., which we've done a number of times. And it just kind of becomes one of those strange little things with Rick nicely watching his watch and tipping me off to pay attention to the time. But what's the point? I guess if we're always going to continue, or are we going to do something else where we focus on ending a meeting before 9? DJ?
So yeah, it is a little strange, but I have appreciated it in the past, and I appreciate it now because it is a subtle reminder of we are having late meetings, we need to operate more efficiently, It's something that I remember. We had to make that motion to go past 9 o'clock again. It's simple, it's quick, but just for me as an individual counselor, it's a reminder of efficiencies and what we can do to work on them.
All right. What about you, Rick? Do you like it? He says he does. All right. Are we going to keep it? All right. Well, thank you for keeping the time for me, Rick. Well, the day that you're not here, I'm going to miss that. All right. On to our big topic, I guess, which is this is a mouthful, but it's DJ's words, policy decision-making methodology, and the difference between workshops and meetings. And DJ and I have talked a fair amount about this, but just to catch you all up, I guess we've had some discussions about what is the difference between a workshop and a business meeting, and at what point do things move from a workshop into a business meeting, and especially those, thumbs up polls last year that the newspaper loved to write about. So I guess we want to have a discussion about what the difference is between those two and how to move something through our down the path. And DJ?
Yeah, let me get in there. So here's how I had envisioned this meeting, is there was two sides to the same coin. We're going to be talking about efficiencies, and we're going to be talking about policy decision-making methodology. That's a mouthful. So in my mind, that we've talked about efficiencies, that's gone really well. Now this is stage two. It is absolutely critical that this council decides on how we make decisions. How do we compose business? How do we go from an idea on the calendar to codifying something in the code? How do we make those changes? We need to decide how we do that, and we need to decide to do that the same every time. Formerly, it was workshops show preferences, and to Wednesdays we have action. There wasn't a lot of wiggle room. This is just how we did business, for better or worse. And I've noticed some discretion, if you will, involved with some decisions that some councilors or a mayor might want to do, and that gets expedited or expedited, and some things that have just kind of taken some time and been dealt with differently. I don't think that's fair for council. I don't think that's fair for staff, and I don't think it's fair for our constituents. We need to have a business model, if you will, a methodology by which we do business and how we make our decisions, and we need to adhere to it. So that's this portion of that.
Valerie?
Yeah, I will agree with that. And I say that because one of the things that, we know when we're getting ready to make policy and make big decisions, you have to have really thought out where you stand. And if you're still having a lot of questions before you bring it to that step, then that's when I think when you lead to mistakes or doing things too fast. And I've felt, I didn't necessarily agree with the thumbs up or whatever. I still forget hands, thumbs, whatever. It makes me crazy. But the reality of it is that I felt comfortable by the time I came to a meeting. I may not have completely made up my mind, but I knew that I had all the information that I needed to make that decision. And I think that, unfortunately, and I'm just going to use the adult use ordinance as an example, that was a decision that was made at a workshop that wasn't ready to be vetted at a meeting. And so that's unfortunate. There's counter damages done. And so I feel much more comfortable waiting to a meeting to where all of my real questions have been vetted, so that I don't feel that I necessarily have to make a decision or feel the pressure to make a decision that I'm not ready to make. And I know that you can postpone it to another meeting, but I think that since it's always been done in such a way that the council meetings are when you're going to make a meeting, I think that's kind of what our constituents have come to expect. My thoughts.
I guess from my perspective, workshops are a good opportunity to get background on a subject, but I would prefer that the council avoid deliberation in workshops and save the deliberation for meetings, which causes an issue with the way, a conflict anyway, with the way things were done in the past, because I feel that particularly, in these thumbs up preferences, the council was making initial decisions that pointed them down a certain path before they got to the business meeting. And so I would like to keep our workshops focused on background and not get into that deliberation point before we've received public comment, or immediately after we've received a presentation, without having those few days. Sometimes we get 2 days, sometimes we might get several weeks to kind of mull something over, have the opportunity to ask more questions, get public input at a council, a Wednesday night business meeting before publicly, deciding our direction. But I feel also that making, I don't feel the pressure at a business meeting to make a decision. I guess if I were a counselor and needed more time, I would say I need more time. If I, said I needed more information, I would say I need more information, and I wouldn't vote that night. I think that is taking action. I don't think you have to make a yes or no decision just because something's on a Wednesday night business meeting. So that's kind of my spin on it. Vanessa?
I appreciate that. Thank you. I think that's a lens that we often lose sight of, so I think that is important. And Councillor Lovelace, you brought up that adult use ordinance discussion, and I think that's actually a really great example for this discussion right now. Our February 3rd meeting, although the development code for Articles 14 and 13 were on the agenda, we were unable to take action on that item because there wasn't a specific ordinance drafted for that. And I think that process awarded us the ability to have that conversation, to receive public comment at that time from individuals, and there was nothing set in stone for us to vote on that night, so that we can move it forward, considering the staff report, considering council deliberations, considering public comment from folks, and refining that to what would work best for our community. So I do take issue with attending a business meeting, having an ordinance already drafted before we even receive public comment on that ordinance, because at that point it kind of seems like the council's decision is already made up prior to even hearing from the public.
Any other thoughts, Valerie?
Well, I'm going to disagree with that a little bit, and simply because we can still change the ordinance even though it's brought it up. But I think most people, when it comes up to an ordinance in a meeting, that's why we get the huge masses of people come in here expecting you to make a decision. And you're right, we don't have to make a decision at that time. But I also know that when it did get pushed back with all of the other things going on, it's really hard to, because I kept going out all the time to people asking about the ordinance because I knew it was coming up. But it didn't really hit until, boom, somebody saw it in the paper and they're going to make a decision tonight. So, like I said, I don't know what the best operation is. I just know that I don't like to be rushed into something. I like to be able to and sometimes I need to see the ordinance before, so that I need to mill it over my head to think about how it could be changed before I bring it to a public meeting. So anyway, I don't know. I'm not sure that I know exactly the right answer, but I do know that I prefer to have my questions answered, questions that I'm having answered at workshops, because I feel less of a pressure and more of an opportunity to really think them over before a meeting.
So just as a refresher on what happened in that particular instance, we did have a workshop, I believe at the end of January, and then we put it to a business meeting in, I think, February 3rd, you stated. And then the council voted in favor of moving towards repealing the ordinance, at which time the public hearing for that process got scheduled. Ended up having a technicality that caused our public hearing to get bumped down the road, but it would be helpful to know what people think could have or should have been done better or differently in that process along the way.
Can I just like a clarification? And you're right, I'm going to agree, but the February 3rd was a workshop or a meeting? Was that a meeting?
I believe that was the business meeting.
Okay, and was the 5-3 taken at a workshop or at a meeting?
No, it was at a business meeting.
It was at the business meeting. And then, that we voted then to move it forward, is that correct? I'm just trying to figure this out too, because I agree, it was a,
Yes.
yeah, so I'm just looking for that clarification. Go ahead, Vanessa.
It was a 5-2 vote to direct city staff to draft an ordinance.
Okay.
And in the old method, that preference would have been given at the end of a workshop. So you would have deliberated to the point of making that suggestion at the end of a workshop, at which point then it would have moved immediately to the public hearing where public could comment. So I think I actually, didn't fast track anything. It actually slowed it down by one notch along the way. So just as we're having this discussion. Rob, did you have something? And then Joel?
So I don't feel that our current process or way of doing things is fundamentally broken. I don't think that there's a lot to fix as far as discussing and getting information at workshops. I think also what some might call deliberation, I would call discussion at a workshop with other counselors, because it spurs thought, it spurs questions. I don't mind that at all. I think that if at any workshop, we could take a show of hands to say, are we actually ready to take action on the following Wednesday night? And if, 3 counselors are not, then maybe we shouldn't take that action. But I feel that it's, right now what we have is probably I think bridges the gap between rushing things for the sake of expediency or bogging things down so much that we never get anything done. So there is a fine line there. We don't want to do either one of those things. We don't want to rush. We don't want to take forever to do things. So I just don't feel the process now is fundamentally broken. Why the public didn't understand that ordinance particularly well as far as the adult use ordinance, I'm not sure. But I think that if counselors are willing to speak up, if they're not ready to make a decision, if they're not ready to have a business meeting on something, I think that would suffice. And we can establish that on any money workshop. Are we ready to actually move forward on Wednesday night, making this whatever decision we had thought we were going to make? But to tie up multiple business meetings for what really should have been accomplished, I feel should have been accomplished as more information gathering at a workshop, I can't really see tying up more business meetings to get that done.
I'll note that our weekly workshops are going much longer than our bi-weekly meetings. So I don't know that tying up time during those Wednesday meetings has been nearly as much of a problem as having overly long workshops. Joel, did you have something? And then DJ?
Well, I second Rob's assessment that I don't think it's broke. I look at the workshop as the top of the funnel, and it narrows down the funnel maybe halfway, and realizing that we can get another funnel if we want to by the time we go to a decision. But the other thing it does, it's very respectful to the public, because it starts to let the public know where we're headed. We're not making a decision yet, but it's kind of like a hypothesis, a working hypothesis. And when people, if you just give them a bunch of facts, they may come up with one thing. If you tell them what you're thinking before you make a decision, they may tell you something entirely different. I'd like to share with the public, I don't like to blindside them. and so as I think the present process allows us to do that and to be respectful of them and let them know in our fact-finding what we're thinking, where we might possibly be headed. It also is sufficient for the staff. But then I think when we get to the workshop, not the workshop, but the meeting, we have to know that this isn't an hypothesis, this is a decision-making meeting. And so there's a difference between the two. And I don't think in the past that was well understood by anybody in terms of the decision-making process. But there is some value to having that happen because it does let people know ahead of time what the nature of the decision is.
DJ?
So I have to take two positions here. As an individual counselor, my support would be doing business as we have heretofore because it works. However, as the council president, I've noticed that there are inconsistencies in how we do business, and that argument position is not good, bad, or indifferent at this point. It's just that decisions have been made, discretionary decisions, to change how we do business. Some things have been purposefully expedited, some things have been slowed down, and that policy has been different and at times confusing. So that argument is that we just need to solidify how we do business. It's currently permissible under Section 8 to make decisions and propose direction in workshops, as if it were a regular scheduled Wednesday council meeting. It's legal for us to do so. If we want to change that, and it's council's desire to do so, we'll then provide that direction. But currently, the way that we've decided to do business heretofore, this council, is how we have done it. And if you would like to change it or have any other ideas, and at this point, good, bad, or indifferent, we need to solidify how we conduct business. That's what I'm encouraging.
Do you have anything specific? Like a specific example that we can relate to, I guess, on an inconsistency or?
Sure. Well, the adult use one is a pretty good example. It's not a perfect example, but it's a pretty good example. We were disallowed from making a preference at a workshop, which is permissible by law. It went to a council action meeting, and if you recall correctly, staff was beside themselves. We were asking them to strike up a resolution or strike up something for us that we could make a decision on, but they could not do that because council had not shown a preference or what we had wanted to change. Now, the reason this isn't a perfect example is because outside of that meeting, we realized that we had to notice DLCD, and we actually were able to get something done by happenstance, by telling staff, this is what we would like to submit to DLCD. So almost on accident, we got something done that evening because it was land use and we needed to submit to DLCD. So that's a pretty good example of what I'm talking about. I think we should have been able to give staff direction out of that workshop so that we could have gone to a next business meeting with anticipated action, but we always still have the option to say no. We always have the option to say we're not ready yet. We've received a little public comment. There's some concerns. Let's push this down the road a little bit. Whatever it is that we want to do, there's protection mechanisms set into that methodology. But I'll say it again, what we need to do is we need to be resolute in how we conduct business, and we need to do that every single time.
So I guess what is your proposal for how to do that then?
Okay, so we have workshop. we have a calendar. We have workshops. Through that workshop, we can propose direction to staff to show a preference in what we want to do, what we want to make action on. If we're not ready to do that, it doesn't go to council action. It can either A, die, or 2, go to another workshop to gather more information until we're comfortable showing a preference. And then at that time, it goes to a council action with staff having a prepared presentation that during that business meeting, we can make action on it. That will be theoretically the final official vote. Except for in the instance that it's not unanimous, then it goes to a second reading. That's the way that I would propose that we continue to conduct business.
Okay, so at the end of the workshop, showing the preference for council direction. However, the workshop is the very first time that council's had the opportunity to learn about a particular topic, so they won't have really had any time to think it over. But that would be your
Well,
preference?
Theoretically, you could entertain the possibility that council is not ready to show a preference after the workshop, and that's okay. We don't have to show a preference.
But then it
But
would
if
have
it's
to
our
go
will
to-
to do so, it's our prerogative.
Then it would have to go to another workshop?
Theoretically, yes.
Okay. Brian?
So regarding this question of preference, I think it kind of at the core of what this discussion is trying to address is I think there's a perception maybe in the public that in the past, council has gone too far down the decision-making road in workshops where when they get to the business meeting, people feel like the decision's already made and their voice doesn't count. So I think that's kind of the core of this. And so the preference piece is kind of like where that line is. So, and I also think that the public has an expectation that workshops are fact-finding. We are here to learn things at the workshop, and the expectation is that the business meeting is when we make the decisions. So I feel like showing preference at a workshop might be going just a little bit too far. I feel like if we took it back just a little bit and maybe said that we had all the information that we needed to make a decision, move it to a business meeting without showing a preference would be maybe a little bit better middle ground. Because then, there's not, we haven't shown that this is the way we're planning to go, so people still think that, or, there's still the expectation and people feel like their voice will be heard. However, the counselors feel that they have enough information to make that decision at the business meeting.
I think Rob said early on in this discussion a preference on whether we're ready to take action. I'm not sure if I'm attributing it to the right person, but I guess to me that's the preference, and I guess that's what I've been striving for, is like, do we have enough background that we're ready to move this to a business meeting, as opposed to, how do you feel on repealing the ordinance, or, something along those lines. So to me, a preference is, I've heard enough from workshop, let's move this to the next level. I just want to remind you, we actually don't have to have workshops on things. We could deal with everything on Wednesday night meetings. A workshop is an opportunity to take kind of a deep dive into a particular subject. But in fact, there are plenty of things that we deal with exclusively at business meetings, including these land use hearings, which are some of our bigger decisions, that you're not getting workshop background on. To me, at a business meeting, you can decide not to decide at that moment, and that is an action. And DJ and I have had some fairly extensive discussions about what is an action. And I take a pretty wide view of it personally, that, you can decide you need more information, you can decide you're not ready to decide, or you can decide yes or no. You can take a look at whatever resolution or ordinance staff has put before you and decide, I like this part of it, but not that part of it. And if we have to move that on to successive business meetings, I don't personally have a problem with that. But if that's kind of the crux of some of the discussion we've been having, because it is a fairly substantial change from the way things were done in the past. And I believe Rob has had his hand up, and then Valerie.
So if we, as the council, did not, to some degree, show a preference at a workshop, I don't know how you could give the staff guidance as to what ordinance or resolution they should bring to a Wednesday night meeting. So if we're going to, at a workshop, decide, okay, we're ready to act, and we're going to act at the next business meeting, what are we telling the staff to do? We have to tell them to draw up an ordinance or a resolution that says X, Y, and Z. Or I don't know what else we would be doing. So I don't understand, if we don't show some kind of preference, how can staff be ready for the action on a Wednesday night meeting? I don't see how that can work.
And I guess in my world, they might not in terms of having something drawn up. I think there's some cases where each item is a little bit different. There's some cases where they might be able to draw up some drafts of things that we either, accept or amend. And there might be other instances where, where we just have the ideas, which we usually have. If you look, on the recommended possible actions, there's usually this particular item here.
Sarah, with all due respect, you've talked a lot after a counselor has talked, and then again and again. Can I ask?
He asked a question, yeah.
Can I ask that we?
So I'm addressing
let
the
others
question,
talk?
and I'll move it on, thank
Yeah.
you. But, this particular item here says we can approve the text as amended, we can, approve something with revisions, we can deny, we can postpone. This is things that they've already outlined as alternatives. I think it wouldn't change that process. Valerie?
Turn on my microphone first. I'm just going to say that, change is hard. And I realize and recognize I'm one of the ones that was used to doing things one way and then is, kind of thrust in doing it the same way. And so I feel a little bit unsettled. But what unsettled me the most was when I heard over and over again that, well, this was approved 5-2 by the council when that wasn't the case at all, because all we did is ask that an ordinance be written up, and yet they got that perspective that, oh, but it was already approved, and so therefore they had moved ahead financially and with planning, and that had been allowed to happen, and then suddenly when they found out that it wasn't approved, there was this huge rug pulled out. And that was the problem that I really saw, because I really wasn't ready to make any kind of decision, because I needed to see what that ordinance looked like with Zippo before. And so I would have just preferred to have that ordinance brought to me at a workshop so we could have that sort of discussion or deliberation or whatever. And I would agree with Rob, you can't have a workshop without having deliberation. A discussion, deliberation. Somebody described the difference between the two, because that's how my brain thinks, is my brain thinks through a discussion, and to me discussion is a deliberation. It doesn't mean that I'm voting one way or another, but I'm working my way through and having interaction with people of different ideas. So it's to me, it's just kind of like this mushy area, and I don't understand why we have to move it to get public comment, because all of us are out in the public and talk to people, and I just don't feel comfortable putting myself into the situation of making the decision when I've got full force people up here, if I really haven't had enough time to work through that, what is going to be coming at me ahead of time, if that makes sense.
Mark had a comment?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from a staff perspective, I think all we're looking for from council during workshops is, so we'll present an agenda item, whether it's something that staff felt needed to be on the agenda or something that council has to be on the agenda. And then from there, in the call to action, usually, we'll put something in the call to action that says, do you want us to prepare an ordinance consistent with the topic that we've discussed today? And so council would indicate a preference. And so I think the term, when Councilor DeLaGrange, it sounded like when you were talking about a preference, I think that was more in the context of, well, which way is the council going to vote on this substantively at a business meeting? That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for a preference of, is there a council preference for us to write up an ordinance or resolution consistent with that topic? And typically we'd bring that back at a business meeting. As the case may be, it could be that council says, yes, we'd like you to write something up, but we want to consider it in another workshop instead of a business meeting at that point. So that's all we're looking for out of workshops.
Okay, I've got Joel, then DJ, then Rob.
Well, I like your questions. And so as I work through those, where does deliberation occur? Most of it occurs at the meeting. And I think in the past where there's been too much deliberation at a workshop, you've pointed that out to us, and I think we've respectfully followed your leadership. Where do decisions get made? It's at a meeting. Or preferences can also be at a meeting, depending on what the council, if they're ready to take action, if the subject is ripe. Preference could also, as a hypothesis to better get public input, could also be done at a workshop if it's appropriate. It doesn't have to be, but it's nice to, if there is a preference at that point in time, it would be, I don't want to hide that from anybody, so that if they want to give public input that's meaningful to me, and say, Joel, you missed something here, I think that's good. And then public comment fits in at both. So there's nothing wrong with, in terms of your questions. I think they're very good questions, and that's the way I would answer them.
Thank you. DJ, then Rob?
I just wanted to follow up to keep having this dynamic conversation. Rob did point out, but I like what you're coming after right now, Brian. Let's try to fine tune and perfect this system. The only thing that I can think of is, without showing that preference and going to a Wednesday meeting, one of the issues I took with the adult use thing is we had another Wednesday meeting to then show a preference. So we theoretically added one more meeting, one more official council action meeting that was historically reserved for making official decisions, to have that discussion about showing a preference. And so that right there is that fundamental slight change from what we had been doing. And so let me also interject that if that's the way that council wants to do business, then let's do business that way, and we can just be okay with it, good, bad, or indifferent. But then Valerie, I wanted to also respond to you by saying that remembering back on that first workshop meeting, I agree that using the past practices of doing business, we should have had another workshop. We should have said, look, hey, I didn't see quite consensus, didn't see a wholehearted direction of council. So we should have arguably had another workshop. What happened is the mayor said, we're not going to make a decision about this today. We will have a business meeting about this, and then we will show. That's what I'm talking about. The decision-making methodology was changed, ad hoc, and now we're dealing with this. So if that's the way we want to do business, let's do business. But we should have had another workshop, which is how we've always done business, because there was further clarification and there was further information that I believe the council had a whole desired at that point in time. So just for the sake of dynamic conversation, those are my comments.
Rob?
So I think I basically agree with everything DJ just said. The question, I think, would become, at a Monday workshop, if there were counselors who are not comfortable moving to an action item on a Wednesday night, how many would it take to prevent that item from becoming an action item on the following Wednesday night? If one counselor wasn't ready, is that enough to prevent it from moving to an action item? Should it be 2? Should it be 3? What's the threshold of, do we need another workshop? What is that threshold? And we can come up with a number that we can all vote on, or possibly even all agree on unanimously. I think another issue that, when talking about listening to public input, I know that in years past, my guess, I don't know, I've attempted to communicate an email to councilors in the past, before I was on council, and I know that pretty consistently, Rick and Valerie would respond, and some of the council emails would be essentially like a black hole. You'd never hear back ever under any circumstance, and you hear that from a lot of other members of the public. I think, number one, quite frankly, as simple as this is, what we've already done, when automatically when people email in, they get a response email signed by the mayor that says, thank you for your email. Automatically, the public even knows, well, the email got there. Thank God, that's half the battle. It's there. Whether they're going to listen to me or respond or agree or not agree, that's a different story. But you never in the past would even know if you got their email address right. So talk about a public that doesn't feel like they're heard. You don't know if your email got through. So we've already acknowledged to people that their emails have gotten through. I very seldom copy the whole council in a response that I send to a constituent, but I've responded to a lot of constituents. I know that I would assume that Valerie and Rick have continued to do that. I know that Sarah has responded to some, And I think that if we were all to make sure that we did more of that, the public would also feel more heard more of the time. But I can just tell you, in years past, it was not that way, and it was frustrating as a member of the public. So I don't know that the public really understands that on Wednesday nights, when we have an ordinance or resolution in front of us, it can be amended right there on the fly. They think that, oh my gosh, they're going to just rubber stamp what they talked about on Monday. I don't know how to get that message out, but anything can be amended from, on a Wednesday after further discussion and further understanding. I know the optics look like on a Monday, unless we were to ask the staff to draft 2 resolutions or 2 ordinances or prepare for options X, Y, and Z, please. Since that's probably not practical, the problem is that I don't know how to explain to the public that we can amend anything that we've asked for on Monday. We can amend it before we actually vote to approve it. But I think that we should think about, my feeling is we should think about how many counselors it would take to prevent something from going on the Wednesday night after we've had our discussion or deliberation on a Monday. If 2 counselors are not ready to take action on Wednesday night, should we delay it to yet another workshop? I would say that number is somewhere between 2 and 3, but I think that's probably how we can handle this.
I don't know. I mean, I guess our practice at this point is to take a preference for whether or not we're ready to move something on, and if we get a majority, then we move something on. So that means that 5 have to be in support of whatever, has been, whatever the motion or idea on the table has been at that point, which means that up to 3 counselors might not be ready. DJ?
So this is, I think we're starting to sniff it out, Rob. That's a great recommendation. I do recall in former times, if there wasn't a preference, there's no preference. So I don't know what number the former mayor used, but I do recall that 4 wanted to move forward and 4 didn't, and he just said, we don't have a preference here. This is very clear. We're split in half. There's no reason to put this to a meeting. We're not ready yet. So I'm kind of thinking half. If we have half the council that just isn't there, then that's not a preference. If we have a majority 5, that could be called a preference. Yeah.
And I would say the only thing that I'm asking is whether our question is, are we ready to move it to a meeting and not what the decision is? That's the crux of the question for me is, what is the preference, I guess? If the preference is just to move it to a business meeting rather than, are there 5 in support of this resolution, sort of thing.
So I'd like to just ask, like we talked about this earlier, what council thinks, starting to ask individual councilors about their sentiment about how they'd like to compose business. I think the discussion's been had. I'd like to see kind of a direction, if you will, about what does council think.
Yep. So do you want me to call on each person?
Sure.
All right, we'll start. Rick's got his hand up, so he looks like he wants to start.
I'm in favor of an indication, and I think maybe using different words would help clarify the situation. So if the question is, do we want to move this forward, rather than, I think when you start using words like preference and so forth, it gives a different connotation to it. So I think if you want to move this forward, how many people do I see that want to support that or something? I think words that will help clarify it would be an advantage. Thank you.
Thank you. Joel?
So I got mixed feelings. One is to not do something is a decision also. And if you don't move it forward to the workshop, or to the meeting, from the workshop, you've essentially made the decision not to do it. Maybe that's just semantics, I don't know. Where my mind goes is we have a hypothesis that is worth further consideration at a meeting to further refine and to let the public know what, where we're headed. And then at that point in time, we have to be open-minded enough to know that if one person hasn't said anything, but they bring something up, or if the public comes up at the same time to modify that hypothesis that makes it an idea, why wouldn't we do that? Or maybe something came up that says, you really need to make a decision not to do this. You know, I mean, there's been several times where we've had a subject that was ripe, and for some reason the council was out of touch with what was going on, or there was a segment of the community that got real active. And all of a sudden you get, well, I can't think of an example, but you get all of a sudden 55 letters on something, whether it's the need for a homeless shelter or whatever. And those things are important because they were triggered, that public involvement was triggered by a hypothesis on how to handle it or not handle it. So the way we're doing it in terms of that hypothesis at the workshop, recognizing it's not a decision, and then going forth and recognizing that we make decisions at our meetings, and the way that you've been handling it, I think has been very good, and I don't see any need to change that. And can it be abused? Any system can be abused. So we got to keep each other honest with that and listen to each other and take what each other has to offer to make our decisions even better. Because to try to make a process that doesn't account for our relationships, we could spend the rest of the 10 years of our life doing that. You guys will live longer than I will. And we probably wouldn't be successful. So that working relationship probably is even more important than the process.
Thank you. Valerie?
Yeah, I think this has been a very good discussion. It has, and it's important because it's kind of brought to me, the differences. I will just say that I like to have enough information and clarification before I move to a council action. And so I think it was Rob that said something of like, well, are you ready to move? Do you have enough information to move this to a council action? Is enough for me to really think, am I clarified in my mind enough, or do I have more staff questions that need to be answered before that? So having enough clarifying information to move it to a council action, I thought that I did, because I kind of wanted to go with the flow, but now in hindsight, I can look back and say, no, I really did need more for clarification, information-wise, before I could make a decision. Does that help?
It will help. Thank you. Rob?
Still, we probably need to address where the rubber meets the road, and that is, would we, from the public's perspective, where the rubber meets the road, would we give staff direction to say, please drop a resolution or drop an ordinance that says X, Y, and Z? Because as soon as we take our preference, or whatever you want to call it, to give the staff that direction, then in many people in the public's mind, they're going to think, okay, the decision has already been made. I don't see any way around that perception from happening once we give the direction, because that will have meant that a majority of the council has said, please drop this ordinance or resolution that says whatever. So automatically the public is going to jump to conclusions. They're not going to have faith that their words could mean anything on Wednesday night and that any of us could change our position. How to get past that, I'm not sure. Very often perfect can be the enemy of the good. So we could debate this looking for the perfect solution probably forever and may not come up with it. And I think what we have now is good. I think that the public perception can be that we would have already made a decision on a Monday when we give some staff direction. I don't know how to get around that no matter how long we draw this out. But I think that we need to give counselors workshop time to decide that we're going to give staff direction to draw something up. And if the public perception is that we rubber stamped it on a Wednesday night, I'll apologize ahead of time. That wouldn't be where my mind is at, I actually get even sometimes a little more nervous between a Monday and a Wednesday, thinking, God, this is what I believed on Monday. Now it's Tuesday. Oh, that's interesting. Oh, well, Wednesday's here, and do I still think the same thing? And then Wednesday's discussion happens, and I've got to decide all over again. So I think it's actually working reasonably well as long as we're consistent with it. And again, we still have to give staff direction at some point, and there's going to be a certain perception that's going to be attached to that. And I don't know how to avoid that no matter when we give that direction.
DJ?
So I think that we need to be able to show direction out of workshops. It's legally permissible for us to do. We don't have to show preference if we're not prepared to. I'd propose that majority is a preference. There's 4 counselors that aren't ready, then we need to recognize that we're not ready. And in fact, we can even adjust, recognizing maybe there's 3 counselors and we don't want to push them. So change your mind, say no, so we can confidently move forward. That's what the individual counselor wants. As a member of this team, is I want a confident and clear direction that this team understands that this is how we do business and we are comfortable with doing business that way. That's what I really want here. That's the spirit of this conversation.
Vanessa?
So I think it's really important to preface this with, I don't think anyone's speech should be stifled. I don't think that we should be told essentially when to be quiet, when we can or cannot deliberate. I think anyone should be free at any time to speak their mind. With that said, on the flip of that coin, I think that we should all be respectful of the fact that there's only 24 hours in each day and that we each live our own lives that we have to go about when outside of these meetings. Workshops, according to our city website, are defined as informal, 75 to 90 minutes, to which we're clearly outside of the bounds of today, are generally staff presentations on a specific subject, agenda review, or other matters the council has requested. So I believe that they should remain within that definition, although, yes, we are legally able to make decisions in these public meetings. I don't think that that's currently the purpose of them, so I think that that definition should remain. I don't believe that any decision-making should be done in the workshop, and I really appreciate Councilor Riker's recommendation to use the language of moving something forward or requesting more information on something. I think that keeps it in that informal position that it is currently defined as. And then from there, we can move it forward to a business meeting where we can hear, staff does a really great job of saying, here are all of your options. You can do X, Y, and Z. And from there, the council has the opportunity to hear from the public on what they feel, what their experiences are, what each option is. We can then have that open deliberation, and then we can move forward with the direction that we want to take in that meeting.
Kurt?
All right, I don't know how much I can add to this, but clearly I don't think we're going to give council direction on something that we all intend to vote against. So I think showing a preference is just a natural thing, just like Rob was saying. I'm not sure how you can get around that. And if we intended to have a meeting to shorten meetings, and this is it, we failed.
Oh, you haven't been at the long ones yet. Thank you. Brian?
I'm kind of in the middle on this. Like I do really like what Rick said about showing preference to move a topic to a business meeting. That totally makes sense to do. Again, it comes down to the difference between showing preference to move the topic to a business meeting as opposed to showing preference on what our decision is going to be on that topic. And as the mayor pointed out, you know, if we show a preference to move something forward as opposed to, you know, what way we're leaning on it, you know, given the nature of the topic, I think staff would have, in most cases, a recommended action, alternative actions, as they often do. Those can come forward at the business meeting. And then, you know, on the flip side of that is that way of doing business could potentially slow things down and make things take another meeting to get done. Like if we move it to the business meeting, and, you know, whatever, and then at that meeting, then we say we want staff to draft up an ordinance, or whatever the situation may be. I could see potential for it making things take longer. However, I don't know if it's worth doing that, so the public has the perception that, you know, it's an open and transparent process that isn't predetermined.
All right, well, Rick, but back to the first for the final comment here.
I like what Brian is saying, and I think one thing is public perception, and I wonder if a motion might include words like this. At this time, do we want to move forward to take public input at a Wednesday meeting? So we're not making any decisions or indicating direction, but we're saying, yes, now we're ready for public input. Just a suggestion. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, good discussion, everybody. I think I think there's some room for flexibility maybe, because not every situation is going to be exactly the same, but partly at the end of our Wednesday, or at the end of our workshops, you know, I'll partly be relying on you to, you know, provide the appropriate preference, and just, you know, continuing to work on this as we go forward. But it sounds like overall our preference is to have some sort of wording about moving something forward to a business meeting rather than taking a preference on a specific direction. But I think, you know, we're just going to have to kind of see how it goes with each call too. So some things are more complicated than others. All right, and I'll review this meeting later to just soak up again what everybody has said. Brian?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's comments on this, and I appreciate DJ's desire to have something structured so we have something to lean or fall back on, I guess, in situations where things maybe aren't as clear. But given where we're at right now, it seems like we might need to kind of have some more meetings and kind of feel out what that path may be.
Rob?
So one thing that just occurred to me also, if we were to have multiple business meetings or multiple business meetings on the same subject, I'm just wondering if members of the public would be allowed to speak twice, which is not the worst thing in the world, but we might be hearing from the same people over and over again, and it'd just be something we'd want to address if we did go in that direction.
Yeah, for sure. If we had if we had that happen repeatedly, it could become more time-consuming. All right, I think we're ready to move on. Do I need to make you raise hands? No. Okay. Next up, we have a discussion on the historical marker grant, and I think Brad has been waiting to talk to us.
Okay. Good afternoon. Got about 8 slides for you here. Should go fairly quickly. Council has some familiarity with this topic. We're going to be talking about the Redwood Empire Indian Marathon Monument. This is coming through a motion of the Historical Building and Sites Commission. And the council, speaking of workshops and giving general direction, was informed about a potential monument, and so this is giving you a little bit more background on that. The HBSC motion was to support the siting of a freestanding monument on city-owned property that recognizes the Redwood Empire Indian Marathon event. And this is relating to your council goals, particularly of providing cooperative shared leadership involving council staff and community. In your packets today, there's actually a more comprehensive description of what this historical event was, but just for the purpose of the public and to give you a quick snapshot, this was an event that took place in 1927. There were 11 Native Americans that competed in a 480-mile foot race from San Francisco to Grants Pass, and it ended at the intersection of 6th and G. The run was used to promote the region and the travel route of the Redwood Empire Highway, and each competitor had to run or walk all the way. They could stop and rest, they could sleep whenever they wished, and they were each allowed a support car, which in 1927 probably would have looked a little different than the support cars today. On the fourth day of the race, it became apparent that it was a two-man race between John Southard and Henry Thomas. John was one of, I think, 3 brothers that were involved in the race. And he ended up winning the first prize of $1,000 in 1927. He did the race in 7 days, 12 hours, and 34 minutes. So this was a big deal. Actually, that race was reenacted, I believe, in the 1980s at some point. The Historical Society of Eclampus Vitus, their local chapter, Quajo number 1859, they approached the Historical Building and Sites Commission asking approval that Grants Pass build a monument basically honoring this race. HBSC did have 2 guest presentations in 2019, and then they came back again just recently and had a more formal discussion and made a motion to you. Specifically, this was where to put it. I believe that the society had actually first approached us about being in Riverside Park, so we had kind of done some more of their thinking. The HBSC thought that maybe right at the conclusion of the race was the more appropriate location. Eclampus Vitus Society did get a grant from Four-Way Foundation that would pay 100% of the cost for the marker, and they are requesting city approval. They do need to expend those funds by June 1st. So that is really the reason why this kind of got moved up, I think, on the council's workshop agenda here. There is, as I mentioned, a separate document that contains the specific text that would be engraved on this monument. The Society does similar monuments, and here are a couple of examples of those in other locations. Galice has one that looks similar. Here's the one in Galice, and it does have the flagstone. These are fairly sizable monuments that they're looking at, about 71 inches tall and 51 inches across the bottom, 32 across the top, and then it has sort of a tapering. So at 3,500 pounds, they're not something that probably somebody's going to come and walk away with. So the location of it, as I mentioned, has been discussed and is being proposed there at the Welcome Center property. The plan for that is to, at some point in the future, have some work done. So we were kind of looking at, well, we wanted to try to keep it, far enough away from the building that any work in the future on the building, it wouldn't hinder that, but also provide it so that it's quite visible and accessible to the public so they can read about the event. There's a location here. It is a landscaped island. There is an electric vehicle charging station proposed really close to here. That's what on the screen, what the EV stands for. Here's the shot from 6th Street, and that yellow star there would basically be where we think that it could be placed. So HBSC did find that the event was significant to the development of tourism for this area, and that a marker would be appropriate in the historic district. And the material that they talked about is actually a vintage brick that would go quite well with right across the street on the other side of G Street. They left their motion a little bit open. They do support flagstone or another similar attractive material that could be used for it. So the proposed action is basically to authorize use of city-owned land. The city owns that piece of property that the Welcome Center's on for construction of the monument. There would not be any city funds involved. As I mentioned, Eclampus Vitus did obtain this grant to build it. They would have volunteers that would do that. They, as I mentioned, built other ones. As well as the maintenance, they actually perform maintenance and repair on all the monuments that they erect. So the call to action today is at your discretion. I put May 19th on there just because in order for them to expend the funds, that would really be the last date by that June 1st date where they need to have those funds expended. So the alternative would be to move this to a workshop for further information or do not authorize us to proceed.
Thanks, Brad. Does anyone have any questions about this? DJ?
So that material, the motion, flagstone or brick, whose discretion is that for the material used?
I think at this point, it's somewhat of an issue of the availability of it. So, I think that's really kind of up to council in terms of how, if you want to have a say in that. But as I think if they get the go-ahead, then they would, start looking for that material. If it's available, brick is definitely going to be the one to go. If they can't, we could come back to you at that point, maybe.
Sure, thank you.
Rick?
I'd like to continue on that subject a little bit. I think the brick would be more historical, but from this other standpoint, the flagstone, I think it would make the markers stand out better and to be seen and to be recognized by the tourists coming through the area. So that would be my reaction. Of course, I don't see colors like other people do either, so thank you.
Any other questions? Vanessa?
Who named the monument Redwood Empire Indian Marathon? Is that just the name of the marathon?
It was the information in the historical record, and we should probably, just so you know, Chairman Warren, Ward Warren, was aware. He was quite involved in review of this presentation. He was unable to make it here today. The material that was presented, and I'm sorry I don't have a copy of that from the 1920s, but that was the name of the race. So I guess the thought would be to stay in the historical accuracy of keeping what it was actually named at that time.
Thank you.
Joel?
The other thing, Brad, I was thinking of as we approve this, and whether it's either brick or flagstone, I'm not sure I have the expertise to say that, and I'd kind of leave it to the Historical Society and the folks. The recommendation, I think, from the committee was brick. But it'd be nice to have the elders of the Karuk tribe come up for the dedication. That would just be a very respectful thing to do. And they are an independent nation, and they are Native Americans. And we can call the name is what it was back then, but on the sign I like where they used the word Native Americans, and when we correspond with them as an independent nation and invite them to come up for the dedication.
Other questions? All right, council, what would we like to do with this? Are you ready to, yep, go for it. Rob?
I just have some comments. So I know that it was originally, called the Indian Marathon. That was the name of the event. And I know that when we were discussing this, because I was on the Historic Commission at the time this was first discussed, there was the thought that it should, of course, be historically, the name should be correct, Indian Marathon, but we could put that in quotes, Indian in quotes, and then with the text, like in the very first line and what they wrote here, we talk about Native Americans. So the name, the actual historical name is in quotes, and then in the text, Native American is used instead. I'd like to say that this was probably one of the most interesting and fun things that I've ever encountered in a city, in any city government affiliated workshop or meeting. It was absolutely, the history involved in this is fascinating. If I could remember even parts of it, believe it or not, when this race started down in San Francisco, I mean, the idea was to call attention to the new road up the Pacific Northwest, the new way, you know, to the new frontier. And so they had socialites and so forth at San Francisco City Hall, the mayor and so forth. They were there at the start of the race. And uninvited, who showed up but the Grants Pass cavemen wearing their furs and clubs and everything else. And the people in San Francisco were like, what in the world is this? And and the idea was, well, yeah, take this road north, and you never know what you might find, you know? And so it kind of served its purpose. It also got unbelievable coverage in the press. Newspaper coverage, multiple newspaper coverage, covered it every day. It was actually a really big event, and if I remember correctly, at the finish line, which I believe happened at around midnight, there were thousands of people at the finish line at 6th and G. And originally, I know it was planned to be put at 6th and G, and then the second time around it was discussed. They said, why not put it in Riverside Park? And I guess, you know, more logical heads kind of prevailed with their recommendation that no, 6th and G is the spot for this. And I know that there's pictures and newspaper accounts. I think that some form of that should be available in the Welcome Center. Possibly even, you know, T-shirts or something like that could be made at, you know, home of the Indian Marathon or whatever. And as Brad mentioned, in 1987 there was a reenactment, and the Grants Pass, if I have this correct, if I remember correctly, the cross-country coach fielded a team of Grants Pass High School cross-country people. There was a couple of adults, people who are alumni of Grants Pass, who had been on the cross-country team. They ran in it also. And there was talk, and I don't know if it's still going to happen, there was talk of possibly doing another reenactment with the 100-year anniversary, which would be in 6 years, and which would also hopefully finish right there. So it could be if that could be pulled together, that would be an amazing attraction at the right time of year. And you wouldn't want it right in the middle of the summer when it's super hot, so it'd be a great shoulder season attraction, potentially, for that 6th and G area to have the finish line of the 100-year anniversary running of that race. And they may be expecting a captain of the council cross-country team. And we do have an alumni, cross-country alumni, on our council who might be volunteering for that if it comes up. But anyway, it was very, very exciting, and I think it's just amazing. And I think the magic words, of course, is that, what the magic words, I wrote them down, no city funds involved. So I think that kind of makes it a no-brainer, in my opinion.
Vanessa?
I think this is a cool story. It's something worth highlighting, definitely, and I think we should move it forward and allow this to be done. Just, for what it's worth, I just do take issue with the term Indian. To be clear, I'm not an Indigenous American, but, it's always the right time to do the right thing. So I'd like to see those group of individuals referred to as Native American, Indigenous American, or First Nations people.
All right. Do we want to move this forward to a council meeting? Do we need extra info? Valerie, you have something?
I'm just going to say, I have enough clarity of information. I do think that the historic has put the Indian because that's what it was called, and so I am happy with their reference to the Native Americans, and I think they have addressed that here. So I'm ready to move it forward to a business meeting.
Okay. How about all in favor of moving it forward to a business meeting? Raise your hand. I'm seeing Brian, Kurt, Vanessa, DJ, Rob, Valerie, Joel, and Rick. Thank you.
Fun.
All right, agenda review. last but not least, we have a business meeting coming up this week where I will proclaim Drinking Water Week. Then we have public hearings regarding the CLG Development Code Text Amendment, another Development Code Text Amendment for multi-dwelling residential / solar. I wish somebody would write these things out in a full English for me. Note to admin, please. CDBG needs and priorities, a resolution designating heritage trees at Martin Park, which is on Bridge Street, and a resolution designating heritage tree at the water treatment plant, and a public hearing on the comprehensive plan / zone amendment at GP Downs, second reading. Comments, questions about any of that? Brian?
Yeah, there's an item on the consent calendar that I would like to remove. It's the first item. No, it's not the first item. No, it is the first item. I'm sorry. The resolution authorizing the city manager to enter into an agreement with Beeler Excavation for vegetation management of open space. I have questions about that, and I don't know if I need to get into them at this point or not.
Is that the rough mowing as it's written on the
I believe so.
future agenda? Okay, so you want to pull that to council action?
Yes, please.
All right. Anything else coming up this week? Guess I'll just keep reading it. We have a council action item on the bulk water rate, which we heard about a couple weeks ago. And then the consent calendar has that January, February financial report. Did you want that, Valerie, to be a starred item?
You have quarterly ones on top of the monthly ones, am I correct? It seems to me that the quarterly ones is when we did the...
Because the end of the fiscal year, finance really focuses on closing the books for the next 3 months. So ideally, we'd have monthly reports and quarterly reports that would be available at the end of every month. But because we haven't even closed the books for the prior fiscal year, that kind of gets lumped into quarterly reports and then tries to get into monthly reports. And this year with budget, it's just that January and February got done about the same time. So
I think what she's saying is that she would like a quarterly report to be a starred item if
Okay.
we're having quarterly reports.
Yes.
gotcha. Thank you.
Okay, so this one can stand consent. And then we have a resolution to appoint a budget officer for the city manager, and then a resolution to appoint the city manager URA budget officer. Any other comments about Wednesday? Nope. Okay, next Monday's workshop, then we are going to have a presentation from the DMO regarding budget deliverables, and we also have an item for Riverside Park portable band shell for those concerts in the park. Discussion on the wildfire protection plan, and then a couple things that we moved on down the road. That gets us through to next week. Comment, Rob?
So I don't know that, I don't think that we're going to get into this part of the discussion with the DMO on Monday, or maybe we are. But I met with, actually he invited me out for tea, Doug Bradley last week, the DMO chairperson, and what I realized in hearing, when listening to his part of the discussion, what I realized, we talked about a lot of different things, but of course one of the things that he talked about was budget, DMO budget, and I realized that as a council, I don't think that we've actually solidified how much we feel we need to hold back out of the tourism money for things that are no longer going to be covered by the DMO. Or, in other words, we've got, whether it's the Art Along the Road, whether it's Christmas, all the different activities that have been covered in the past, as a council, we're probably going to want to financially still continue to support many of those. Could be the flower baskets, it could be downtown cleanup and graffiti removal if we're looking at it from a tourist perspective. It could be funding the Downtown Welcome Center. Whatever it is, we as a council feel still needs to be covered from a tourism perspective that the DMO is not going to be held responsible for. We need to figure out how much money we need to hold back for those things as a minimum, so that we even know how much is reasonable to consider assigning to the DMO. And I don't think we've done that as a council yet. So we need to be ready for that, whether it's this workshop, we can discuss it, and or some future workshop. But until we have those figures involved, and all the councilors need to have in their mind, what do they feel we should be considering funding that's tourism related, that the DMO will not be handling.
I think that is a very good point, that we haven't had that discussion fully yet. For next Monday, I've asked the DMO to give us a better idea about what sort of services they are interested in providing, maybe to address whether or not they're interested in running the Downtown Welcome Center or using that as any sort of office space, and to put together a rough budget of what they think they might need and what kinds of things they might spend that on. We also, you'll note, have DMO contract on the May 3rd workshop, so that we can continue to look at their contract and ask any other questions that come up as a result. And then we have it on the May 5th meeting, which may be too soon to solidify the contract as well as readdress that executive director search. However, they are looking to move things along and get started, and without a contract, you know, we're in a strange space. But we're not, you know, if you're not ready May 5th, we'll either move it off the agenda or we'll talk about it that day, and then we'll talk about it some more another day. But I did prioritize getting this DMO show on the road, so to speak, because we do have tourism season fast approaching. But good questions, Rob. We do need to be having that discussion as well. Brian?
Yeah, I'm just going to follow up on what Rob said. And basically, the question is, do we need to have in a workshop, an agenda item in a workshop be what he described? I think that might be worth having before we move it to a business meeting.
Okay, well, do you want to plan on having more of that conversation then on May 3rd? Or do you want to get it started next Monday? Either way, we can...
I would say May 3rd would be good.
Okay, well, we do have DMO contract on May 3rd, so if you have questions or if you want staff to put together something, let me know, let Aaron know, so that we can have that be part of the May 3rd discussion as well. Brian?
Oh, Valerie was first.
Okay, Valerie.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that events discussion is a good thing to have. One thing I am going to do, and I think it's important going into it, I know you have done this, Rob, is to look through what the audit that came back from DMO Pros, because he does have a lot of the things that are referenced in that. And one of the things that we've had, I know Aaron has had a discussion with, is on events moving forward. So I would encourage you, and I know I've sent it out once, I will send it out again. I will not be here next Monday, but I'm sure the DMO board will give you the information that you need. But it would be good to have some event information about what is coming about as a result of the events that have, because I do know Jill Ham was out soliciting information and trying to get some background on that. So that might be a good thing for the city to give us some information on what's been gathered there.
Brian?
Yeah, I was just going to follow up and say, after thinking about it for a second, I think it might make sense to have that on the 26th after the DMO budget deliverables, because if we wait until May 3rd, now I'm feeling like that might be too late. It might be good to have that conversation in between the two DMO conversations so we can get the information next Monday, then have that conversation, and then come back and discuss it again the next week.
Do you need us, Aaron, to outline what they're looking for in terms of presentation?
Well, right now, I've got on my mind that you want to have just it's going to be broader than just DMO funding. It's travel and tourism funding is really what the topic item is. And DMO is a part of that. And that's going to be multi-starred, I would believe. The events question would be easy to answer when we just do, just like Active Club, Boatnik. We provide only resources for advertising that is promoting people coming from out of our area and staying here. That's what travel and tourism dollars are used for. All the other funds and the events that we've done before in the past have been general fund, and that's why they got pulled, because we don't have the general fund ability to do that anymore. So, but we've got, I think what you're asking for is more, let's dive into travel and tourism allocation of resources again, I think is what I'm hearing, because it's going to be much broader than just the DMO contract.
Sounds good to me. Any follow-up comments on that? Brian, Rob?
Go ahead, Rob.
So I mean, I would imagine that Adam would probably come prepared, but so we would want to know historically in years past how much the city has contributed to the Christmas tree or Art Along the Road or any other funds that we've ever contributed to these different events. It would be good to know that, to have those figures right there.
I'll provide a memo to council on that this week.
Thank you. Brian?
Yeah, and I just want to be clear in this tourism conversation that there's the DMO, and then from what I've heard from a couple counselors is there's events, but it's this part is bigger than events. This part is tourism-related facilities. That's what this is. So that includes events, that includes capital investments in the community that would bolster tourism. So I want to make sure that that conversation isn't just talking about events, it's talking about the entire category of tourism-related facilities as compared to destination marketing.
Yeah, we'll talk about that some more. And I don't want to, the events memo that I'm going to have will provide that information. For the most part, tourism dollars aren't supposed to be spent on the events unless it's some kind of major regional event. We've been partners in that. We've used general fund dollars in the past to pay for the Christmas tree lighting, to pay for back to the 50s, to do that kind of thing. So it hasn't been travel and tourism dollars because it's not an appropriate use according to Oregon Revised Statutes.
Okay, we'll follow up on that too. Aaron and I have talked about this issue some last week. Any new ideas that you don't have on here or questions for future agendas, Brian?
Yeah, I sent out an email to mayor council over the weekend regarding the school district is considering allowing AT&T to put a cell tower in Gilbert Creek Park. And as I think everybody knows, the school district does own that property. The city leases it from them. But as this was kind of moving quickly, I thought I should just bring it up now because the city has run that property as a park for probably 50 years. And so I wasn't sure if council or the city at large wanted to have a discussion or provide any kind of opinion on that topic.
Aaron, do we have cell tower standards here or?
We do, yes. We have some standards for that.
Okay.
And just from a travel and tourism thing to go back, the general fund dollars, if there were any lodging taxes that were used, it was general fund lodging tax dollars, not that allocated specifically for travel and tourism. But I'll explain that in a minute.
All right,
I would further explain, just to give a little bit more rationale for why I'm bringing this up. The Parks Committee last year, one of their top 3 goals was to do a revamp or redesign at Gilbert Creek Park. So that's something that the Parks Committee has prioritized. I know that the city right now is looking at potential locations for Caveman Pool. I have heard somebody float that as a location for Caveman Pool. I'm not advocating for that, but that has been floated. And so I would just hate for the city to be hindered in our development or redevelopment of that park and have to work around a cell tower that's put in the middle of it by its previous owner.
Rob?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that to the council's attention, Brian. It would seem as it is something that we should seriously consider if it's going to really alter the potential use of that park.
Okay, let's just do some more behind-the-scenes work on that for the moment. I don't think we're ready to schedule anything for a meeting yet, but thanks for bringing it to our attention. And it would be great to dig up those design standards for cell towers and send that to us as a memo as just one part of this process. All right, anything else for the good of the order? Motion to adjourn? Joel?
I move to adjourn.
Valerie with the second. All in favor of adjourning?
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, see you Wednesday night. Thank you. Good discussion today.